do that to make it go live. And wait for to make sure we have sound too. Are we live?
I believe so.
It looks like it. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm Elaine Avenatha, Digital Innovation Leader. And we have a wonderful day here ready for you, filled with lots of awesome presenters. And up first, we are going to be talking with Stacy Justice and Dr. Sandra Hogue. Good morning, ladies. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. We're so glad to have you this morning.
We are happy and blessed to be here. Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Before they get started, once you get in there on the on YouTube, make sure that you introduce yourself into the chat and put any questions that you have for these ladies. And they have other people that are watching the chat as well. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in that chat for us.
Okay, let me see if I can go ahead and I can get started and share my screen. Let's see.
It's beautiful. Looks great.
Okay. And I think I have my captions on.
You do. You got it. Ahead of the game.
I'm learning. So, okay. Let us go ahead and begin. Sandra, are we ready?
We are ready.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you guys for joining us this week as we end our 3-week work on NTI and some of the best practices with NTI and just supporting students. This week of December 16th, we'll focus on student-centered practices for ownership and authentic assessment. Teachers and coaches will demonstrate how to nurture student ownership and how to create authentic opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning. Our featured teachers this afternoon will share successes on implementation and answer any questions about how they developed these opportunities for their students. So today, our goals on the Digital Learning Channel, we want to make sure that you see how do we nurture student ownership during NTI and how do we create authentic opportunities for demonstrating learning during this NTI. And we want to make sure that we're moving students towards new learning and providing them engaging opportunities. So since this is our third time, we want to take a moment and revisit this Rubik's Cube of teaching and really bring in the true heart of what distance learning is. We want to make sure there's equity so all of our students can learn and feel supported. The access so that all students can reach the materials. So what are we doing to scaffold in if there may be deficiencies or gaps for student understanding, but we want to make sure that they're reaching the grade level materials, and what are we doing to provide that support for them? And then maintenance. Maintenance is what are the systems you have in place, and are you promoting the consistency within your routines, within your work on ensuring that positive community is in your classroom? What are those consistent routines that you're working with? And then student-centered. Students have a voice and choice and develop some great ownership within their classes. Next, we want to revisit kind of the core of distance learning. We know that a significant amount of the learning actually takes place outside of our classroom setting. So with our synchronous sessions, I know many of our schools only see kids 1 to 2 hours a week with maybe a little bit of smattering of small groups. So we know a majority of the learning takes place outside of that. But we want to make sure students and teachers are interacting, even though we know it may not be face-to-face all the time. Students can still collaborate and communicate with each other and participate in their own learning. So with this, we want to make sure that we're really kind of using the distance learning model to our advantage even though it poses some great challenges. So what is our distance learning promise? So here is our promise within distance learning, as well as our blended classrooms, because whenever we go back to in-person, there's the chance that we will continue to use a blended classroom. So we want to personalize for students' needs. So what are the strengths that we are identifying, and then supporting them in the background with their needs and really personalizing and tailoring it to them. How are we building skills to support the modern success? What are those opportunities we're engaging students in to build their practices and build their understanding within our backpack skills? That's some of the modern success skills. We want to make sure that we're fostering a sense of ownership in learners around their academic work. Not only are we engaging them in work that is content driven, but what's also sparking the curiosity and the motivation to keep going? How are we building that ownership for kids? And then we want to make sure that we're increasing the unique support for all classes, and not just the student, but also the family. How are we reaching beyond the student and into the family to support them as a whole and bringing them into the learning process? So now, let's take a moment and look. This is due to COVID-19, we've had a large kind of shift in what the needs for schools are. So this is based off the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you can see that school is incredibly important during a crisis, but what's even more important is the student themselves. Really making the self-actualization, esteem, making sure there's a sense of love and belonging, safety, especially with this idea of COVID. We really need to make sure that we're going beyond the content and into the social and emotional learning, because we have to make sure our students are okay before they can ever begin to engage in true learning. So with this, the context, we want to make sure that within our NTI, we can intentionally design lessons and plans that not only engage student interest, but allows them to share ownership of the purpose. And we can do that intentionally and offer up ways to where we begin to move from just that little school component, and the lesson starts to filter down to multiple levels so that we're engaging the student on all levels and supporting them as a whole child. As we continue on, I want us to focus on some 8 cultural forces that define our classrooms. So in the previous weeks, we've engaged on December 2nd and December 9th with some other key tools around these cultural forces. Expectations were discussed, routines, how we might want to spend our time and structure our time with schedules, and how to set the positive environment we need to engage all students. So those are components of these cultural forces that have already been discussed. And if you need to, please take a look back at the other recordings from the digital learning panel to really dive into those a little bit further. Today, we're going to continue and move into the continuum of ownership. And so I'm going to pass it over to Miss Sandra to talk more about the continuum of ownership and how that plays in.
Yes, so when we think about the learning context during NTI and traditional brick and mortar, we find ourselves as the drivers of instruction in different. I lost my visual for some reason, Stacy.
If you click me, it should come back up on your screen.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So in the continuum of ownership, we find ourselves, sometimes it depends on the context of what we're sharing with students, we may find ourselves in compliance. This is the space and time where students are simply, I don't want to say simply, sometimes it's painfully complying with the instruction of the teacher. There are certain non-negotiables in instruction. There are certain things that we don't get to sidestep as teachers. And so it really does involve students having very little voice and choice in what's happening in that learning context. That's really on this continuum. the lower level of our goal, if you would, as far as student ownership of learning. So it's really teacher-centered. We are driving the bus. We are controlling what's happening in that situation. And then if you move a bit, if you're in, the goal is learner-driven, we could move to that next phase, which would be understanding. And this involves the student having some say, some voice and choice in the learning that takes place for them. When I think about the 4Ps planner, when we're thinking about the assessment or the summative performance task, this may look like a combination of the compliance piece where we have a traditional looking multiple choice short answer extended response question. But when we're looking at a backpack worthy artifact that answers the compelling question that we may have built the 4Ps planner around, then we may have a menu of choices from which students can choose, where they would then provide evidence that they have met the success criteria as outlined, once again, by the teacher, right? So there may be some collaboration in the development of that success criteria, but we are still in that understanding phase. Lots of teacher hand in that work. If we move further, we're in investment, and students, it keeps disappearing on me. I'm not exactly sure why. And it's not coming back. There it is. Tech difficulties, please forgive me. But if we're in that development stage, I'll continue to talk about that. Then students are moving closer to owning more of that work in the investment stage. So they develop things independently, they work collaboratively, they decide what's the best learning path for them so that they can demonstrate what they've learned in the context of that learning opportunity. So they have plans that they develop that they have lots of voice in, and that are designed to show you that here's my evidence of what I've learned, right? So it's far more learner-centered when you get to that phase. And the final phase is, autonomy. So the learner decides what they're interested in. They may decide on their own compelling question, as opposed to the investment phase where the compelling question has been provided. They may be given a theme, but they decide on their own compelling question. They find ways to explore that question. They develop a learning plan. They set their goals. They monitor their goals. And then they understand that they have the opportunity to elevate their own voices in an exhibition of that learning. So they may have a project that they've created. They may have an authentic piece that really isn't, it considers the teacher, but you really are secondary to what they're learning. They have a bigger idea for learning in mind. And really, that's where we want to be, learner-driven. That gives purpose to education. I often say the standards we have to care about because we have a contract in the state of Kentucky as public school educators, but kids don't organically care about that. And so when we provide student autonomy in the learning environment, that's the best way to leverage what they bring to the table, their gifts, their funds of knowledge. That's the best way to leverage that with the material that we need them to care about as far as instruction and standards. And so this is, I love visuals. So this is a great visual for me. And as I said, when I started talking about this, there's opportunities. There are times in the classroom where we have to stand firmly in compliance. There are things that are non-negotiable as public school educators. But if we are finding that we are all the time living in compliance, we're going to encourage you, Stacey and I, the CDLI team, the district as a whole is going to encourage you to start thinking about opportunities where you may fold in that level of understanding, where you may fold in investment, and where you may ultimately provide students with autonomy. We understand that we can't live there all the time, but we have to certainly evaluate whether we're living in compliance at all times, because that's the kind of thing that turns kiddos off about education. And that's, I think we would all agree, what we don't want to have happen. Stacey?
Thank you, Sandra, for giving us that great visual and describing to it in depth. So with this continuum of ownership, we want to tie it to those cultural forces that we just examined. So this learning continuum really ties into these cultural forces in the fact that we as teachers can construct opportunities so that we provide purposeful activities for students to engage in that help them move from one step on the continuum to the next. Also, modeling. How are you bringing in the modeling and what the thinkers think? So our kids, we want to develop them as strong thinkers that really take pride in their ideas, but then allow them to go further into the process of thinking, to have some collaboration and discuss kind of where are we and how do we relate to each other? How are our ideas the same or different? And that takes us into the last cultural force, the interactions and relationships. Really showing respect and valuing the differences of opinions, but also how the realities come and how one may contribute to my idea and then providing that credit and support for each other. So we want the spirit of collaborative inquiry and to move from one station to the other in that learning, in that continuum of ownership. Each of these three forces are at play and teachers need to think about when designing instruction. So we know and understand that during this time, we don't have a lot of engagement and interaction because of the platform and the way things are just set up. It's great to have the chat, but we want you to dive into these specific examples on the next slide that we're going to kind of go through a little quickly, but we've created a Padlet that you should be able to access through the link on the Digital Learning Channel schedule in the slides. Take a few moments to review these examples and we can have some continued collaboration through the Padlet about these examples and thinking about what force it may be, what are ways we can become systematic and how we can really engage students. And then look at the examples to determine how are they truly student-centered? Could it be more, or what more could we do? And maybe we need to modify something to make it your own, to fit your own teaching personality. So as we quickly dive into a few of these examples, the interaction of how students learn, especially in mathematics. In math, which you'll see a little bit later today, we really want to focus on the strategies and connecting the thinking and the approaches students are making within the learning. So this is a clip of Mr. Torres and seeing how he's got students that are working together collaboratively to come up and solve the problem on the board. So here you can see their post. Sometimes the teacher has the ability to kind of remove posts if they're not related, but they can actually highlight the strategies and the thinking from students and actually have students begin to explain their thinking and share.
And Stacy, I love this example. I love it because it shows that I know in mathematics there's usually, if you have an equation, a single correct answer. And what this does when you have student work to display is that there are many ways to get it right. And so while students may take a different path, the fourth student's work may be an example of a correct answer, and it may be just as correct as the third sample, but they took different paths to get there. And what that does is show that, that there may be an efficient way to do it, but there may be a way where I really want to demonstrate my thinking that works really well. And so I love that. And it works the same in English, in ELA. There are many ways to explain our thinking. I've been working quite a bit with critical literacy lately. And in critical literacy, we take different paths. We have different understanding about the material, and two students can demonstrate an equal level of mastery based on a compelling question and stand in two completely different positions on that compelling question. And so I love this. And there's a new site, Stacy, that I just discovered a couple days ago that I have to mention because I've been sharing it with anyone who would listen, and it's whiteboard.chat. Whiteboard.chat is a game changer. So I just want to put that out there on the digital channel and for Elaine, because we need sessions on this one. I'll just go ahead and throw that out there. I'm making that request. Okay, Stace, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So as we look on, they're continuing on how you might use Google Slides. This is a tweet about how they're engaging the family. What is the family? What are we watching together? And really trying to meet students where they are. And as you saw, that hierarchy of needs, creating assignments and opportunities to engage students outside of just school. How are we engaging students as a whole? And then next, so what's nice is about using Think Circa, and again, Sandra can talk a little bit more about Think Circa. We've got Think Circa as a way to dive in and engage students to create readers to where they can look at the assignment and then start to digest their thinking. How do they relate to the assignment? What information do they have from the text and the source that they're looking at? But what is also other information that they can bring in that they've experienced? What are their side? What are their facts? Within the platform, maybe they can make a screencastify to explain how they've used the tool to really build up their thinking and their understanding, as well as strengthen their writing skills and their organizational skills. Sandra, do you want to add anything about Think Circa?
Think Circa is just one way, but what I especially love about this platform is that it's encouraging argument. And as I said on the previous slide that I connected with your math example, we can pull from these sources and we can develop an opinion or an argument that may be in stark contrast to our peers, to our teacher, to most people, and still demonstrate the same level of mastery of the standards. And so anytime you elevate the student voice and merge it with the content that they have to learn or that we need to teach, it's a win-win for everyone. And it increases their engagement in school and their investment in the learning.
Absolutely. And then the last example we have is a specific way on how to build up the modeling cultural force. And it's having small consultancies with kiddos. So meeting with kids, checking in with them, hear what they find is challenging. What are some of the great things of NTI that they've liked and that's really helped them during the time? Getting that feedback, but also making it a consultancy to where you're working together with the students to really try to ensure that they're being provided some of the best opportunities. But also during this time, you're modeling positive engagement and how to learn from and listen and respect others in a structured format within your consultancy. And so schools are utilizing and can utilize the consultancy idea of modeling in various ways through student-led conferencing, but also how do I use a breakout room appropriately with kids in a session. And so within that modeling aspect, we're really trying to utilize the student as a co-creator and really give us good feedback on moving forward in our learning during NTI.
And Stacy, I love this one. My goodness, it's one of my favorites. First of all, I love the term consultancies. It honors students as contributors to that learning environment. And one of our high schools, I was in on one of their department chair meetings recently where one of the teachers had been very intentional about this process and ensuring that he was receiving feedback from his clientele on how things were going with NTI, what changes they needed in order to be successful. And so when that happens, it's a beautiful thing. And there was one of our elementary schools that does something with this. They did it in brick and mortar, but it could happen in NTI. I could see it transitioning really well. They called them student-led PLCs, where the students came in and said, how in front of the principal and a whole panel of teachers from that grade group, and gave feedback on the learning opportunity that had been provided by that teacher and used the evidence of their student work, their performance task as an artifact to what that feedback they were giving the teacher. And I think that's a turn of the table. Most of us aren't comfortable hearing from our students, but I think we absolutely have to invite the learner in.
Absolutely. And so we know that this is hard to plan for. There's a lot that we're planning and we're thinking about, but we need to be very intentional. So we've provided these questions within a strategic lesson planning guide to think about as you're trying to enhance your system and make it more towards student-led. We really want you to move along that ownership, that continuum of ownership, and try to challenge yourself, not necessarily to move all the way to the end by tomorrow. We want you to, what are the structures and supports that you need to move one step closer to more learner driven? What is that one thing that you can do to take one step closer in providing those opportunities for students to nurture that ownership? And so as we quickly begin to wrap up, because we're running just a smidgen short on time, We want to quickly discuss how do we create authentic opportunities for demonstrating learning. These 3 pillars are the foundational pillars for assessment, for flexible assessment. We really want to make sure that we're taking assessment over time and that we're really using formative feedback as feedback. What are students learning? But then how am I providing feedback to move them forward? And you want to make sure it's completely authentic to the learning. What are students how are they going to demonstrate? What opportunities and what different modes of demonstration are you actually going to allow for students to demonstrate their learning? And so we've provided a few slides that give you examples of how some of this flexible learning can take place in these formative assessments. Jamboards are a great tool, but we specifically want to highlight the 3 questions that are on there. How can we use this tool to assess student progress? How can this tool align the 3 components of flexible learning? And then what could this tool or goal look like in our own reality? So as you think about the tools that you use within your classroom, how can you also use them to meet those 3 flexible assessment pillars? Pear Deck is another way that we see a lot of teachers using. And then truly, what makes it authentic? What makes an assessment authentic? And so looking at this list of criteria or potential opportunities, we want to highlight that these are just some ideas that you can use, and we're not expecting you to hit every single one in an assessment. There may be a couple that come together. How is it relevant to the student, but that it's really authentic in the world format? How does it relate? Maybe it's a video. Maybe it's some sort of performance that a student can do. And how is the ownership being taken and built up within the assignment? So again, within this list, we don't necessarily expect you to hit every single thing, but it should hit a couple of them in order to be truly authentic. And then here are some types of authentic opportunities that we've seen during NTI that students have been able to promote and share their own learning in. Visual or virtual exhibitions of learning. Maybe they're presentations that are recorded, audio, visual, some music and dance, a theater performance. Maybe a student is recording a monologue for drama, that they really kind of embody those skills that they've learned throughout NTI. Or they're putting on a presentation live. How are you utilizing your live sessions to do some demonstrations of learning and presentations of learning? And then performance assessments. So as we quickly wrap up, we want to draw your attention to this afternoon and the rest of today for some more specific content support as well as teacher support. And what are teachers doing in the classrooms today with NTI that supports this idea? So as you can see the schedule for the rest of the day, we'd love to have you join us. And we want to remind you of some of the great resources that are available within our tool, the 4Ps planning, our backpack of success, and then a little deep dive further into those flexible assessments within the NTI. And then lastly, we have some additional resources for you to dive in deeper in topics that these 3 weeks may have interested you in. So we want to thank you for your time and attention. And I believe I hit the time.
You did awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, there are some people joining us on the chat, and thank you, ladies, for that. And that was one of my favorite parts was definitely the hierarchy of COVID-19 hierarchy of needs. That was really cool too. So as you're joining us live, just make sure that you introduce yourself in that chat and put any questions that you have for our presenters, and they have a team behind them, as well as we can make sure that we get those questions answered. And up next, we have Elizabeth Reed. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm great. I'm so excited to just follow all of those great ideas that Stacy and Sandra presented. And Stacy and I are going to do this together. So this is going to be a great math session leading right from where they led us.
Awesome. Well, let me know if you need anything, and I'll be back here watching the chat for you.
Great. Thank you. All right, we'll give Stacy a second to reset herself. She's going to be the driver of the slides for this one. Oh, go ahead, Stacy. What were you going to say?
It should be up and ready to go for you.
I see it, and I see the captions. I was just listening to the AIC meeting, and I'm just so excited about how these things are all coming together to really develop strong Tier 1 instruction now in NTI, and then as we move forward and, hopefully getting to go back soon. So I'm excited to see all of these things coming together. So I'm Elizabeth, I'm your K-12 math coach, and we're excited to share with you about some ideas for authentic assessment and student ownership in math. And Stacy is going to stay with us and talk about some high school examples and get us rolling here this morning. So let's see, Stacy, make sure I can see where you are on your slide so that we're in time. I think you can move forward one. How do we nurture student ownership during NTI? Yep, I see it. Okay, sorry. I have so many windows open. I'm trying to make sure I'm on the right page. So our guiding,
I know that feeling.
Yeah, our guiding question for today is how do we nurture student ownership during NTI? And specifically looking at math today. So Stacey's going to share a little bit about our stool of mathematical rigor and our connections to equity.
And so I want to take a moment to revisit this slide. We've seen it throughout all 3 math presentations that we've done this month. And why is student ownership important? And for us, it's important because it connects the student building their identity as a mathematician. Our goals as math teachers is that every one of our students see themselves as a mathematician in the world around them. And this occurs during the conceptual understanding and the procedural fluency component, which falls into the culturally responsive education, indicated by the blue and the purple arrows. And so within this, we have to build the foundation. So we begin bringing multicultural education and social justice education to students in a strong mathematical identity, and that they can apply the best strategy based on the context of the problem and what they've engaged in and how they've built their learning. So we want to continue to build that within our students and through our opportunities and the structures that we provide. So I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth to dive into some of our structures.
So let's think about what this looks like in mathematics, because it's a little different from some of the other content areas. So what does student ownership look like and sound like? We really want to focus on the idea of students thinking, sense-making, and developing their reasoning. Students must have the opportunity to be actively engaged in rich tasks, grade-level appropriate tasks, that open the doors to creative and diverse solution paths instead of only passively receiving procedures and steps. If we look at this continuum, we know that kind of just watching someone else do the math, they might develop some understanding and show some compliance, but we want to move kids from that teacher-centered into the learner-driven culture of our classrooms, where kids are really invested in their learning. According to Jo Boaler in her book, Mathematical Mindsets, she says that when students are asked to think intuitively, many good things happen. First, they stop thinking narrowly about methods and they consider mathematics more broadly. Second, they realize that they have to use their own minds and they realize their task is to think about the appropriateness of different methods. And third, their brains are becoming primed to learn and learn from each other and learn from classroom discussions. So let's revisit that strategic planning guide that Stacy shared with us a few minutes ago, and let's dive a little deeper into one of those sections. So as you're thinking about planning, focus on where student thinking might progress through the unit of instruction and where you're going to place those checkpoints to monitor their progress towards mastery. What questions might you need to develop as a teacher to make the connections within the unit to previous units, so that you're activating student schema and building upon the strengths and the assets that they bring to the classroom? As a teacher, we have to intentionally build our units of instruction in a way that fosters students' movement through that ownership continuum, from just understanding and compliance into autonomy and true investment in their learning. These questions on the screen are going to help us frame our units so that student thinking and progression through the continuum are really the focal point of our work. So let's move forward a slide and take a look at a second grade example. In second grade, the major focus of the grade level is on developing place value understanding and using a variety of strategies to add and subtract numbers within 100. Students enter second grade having used their fingers and physical counters or Unifix cubes to make sense of adding and subtracting within 20, using strategies like making a 10 or modeling on 10 frames with concrete objects or drawing representations. And those you can see in the two images on the left, the fingers and counters on 10 frames in the top left, and then the Unifix cubes in the bottom left. In second grade, we build upon their understanding of 10-ness to develop the idea that a 10 is a unit of place value. Students engage with a variety of tools as they develop their understanding of the structure of our number system, and they use it to solve problems, which is standard of math practice number 7. We do not teach the standard algorithm or use tricks like borrowing that are not mathematically sound. Instead, we allow students to use what they know about tens and ones to deepen their understanding and apply it to a more complex and sophisticated set of problems within a larger range of numbers. Let's take a look at that larger image on the right. This is a which one doesn't belong number routine from second grade from the illustrative math curriculum. In this which one doesn't belong example, students will begin to connect the ideas of those concrete cubes, like you see in image A, to base 10 blocks in D, to visual models like the part-whole diagram in B, to a graph, which you see in C. When students have time to consider how each of these is alike and different, the teacher can then ask a question like, how does each representation show us the difference between cloudy and sunny days? The teacher is then eliciting evidence of student thinking that is used for formative assessment to propel learning forward in the lesson, just in time, in the moment. Additionally, students are primed to consider tools or representations that are new or less familiar to them as they continue with the work of the lesson and this unit on adding and subtracting. My middle school friends out there will really appreciate image B because it starts to make us think about our double number lines and our tape diagrams that we use in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Using these representations is modeling in mathematics in the primary grades, which is our standard of math practice number 4. Additionally, this concrete representational abstract sequence, moving students intentionally from physical models to more abstract numerical expressions and equations, is how we give every student an entry point into the grade level mathematics. Last week, Amy Crawford shared a clip of a kindergarten class and some students exploring a dot talk. When students are able to share how many they see and how they see them, we are valuing even our youngest students as producers of mathematical ideas, building their identity as mathematicians. By comparing their strategies for finding the total, the teacher can assess if students are counting all the dots, counting on from a known quantity, which is a very big transition that kids make in kindergarten and first grade. Are they subitizing? So can they just look at the dots and see how many there are in a specific arrangement? Or maybe they're even using double stacks. For example, in the red image, kind of in the center of your screen, that student might have said that they see 2 lines of 3, doubled 3 to get 6, and then counted on 2 more, 6, 7, 8. In the green image, the student may have subitized the group of 5 that looks like the pips on a dice, and then counted on 3 more to get 8. Once the teacher knows what strategies a student is currently using, they can then plan instruction to move the student along in the progression of fluency strategies, making mastery of that grade level standard the goal by the end of the year. Additionally, the students are going to hear their peers' strategies. They're going to also begin to internalize those strategies. And this is where the idea of math as a shared exploration comes into play, giving more students a chance to contribute to collective problem solving and a communal understanding of mathematical concepts. When everyone's ideas have strength in them and the teacher points out their value because of the connections between them, students will begin to make these connections on their own and build on each other's thinking, both reviewing their understanding and deepening it at the same time. This is moving students along that continuum from compliant understanding to active investment in their learning. And I think about Zaretta Hammond's moving from dependent learners to independent thinkers. It is culturally responsive and evident right here.
So as we move into a secondary example, this is a demonstration and a short video of two students working together in a breakout room, and they're fostering some ownership of their own learning here. They're moving a little bit from they're trying to grapple with the understanding and verbalize their thinking with how they might represent a situation using that describes candies, but using an actual mathematical expression. So let's take a few moments and listen to the conversation that these students have.
Oh no, I don't think we are hearing that. Let me see if I can get...
Oh no!
That's okay. That's okay. I can get that pulled up really quickly for us. Let's see, what slide is that?
It is slide 8.
Slide 8. Okay. All right, let me jump in. Give me 2 seconds and we will get this. This is the beauty of live sessions. Let's see. There we go. Put this in. And 2 clicks away, so just a second. There we go.
You're okay.
Thank you for getting that, because I think the student voices in this are what's so powerful.
Absolutely, yes, it is. And I've seen, let's see. Okay. Got to share my screen first. That would make sense. And this one, share screen. There we go. Okay, it says no. Hold on just a second. I can definitely do
I
this.
need to stop sharing?
No. It's a setting on my computer that was being mean to me, so it's okay. We got
Gotcha.
this. It is not you. Okay. Getting it. There we go. Okay. You cannot see it, ladies, but everybody on YouTube can. So just so you know.
Oh,
And the
okay.
shoes
Here we go.
the shoes are $3 or not $3, 3 cents more than the lollipops. So we might have to do some math here.
The lollipops, since she bought 4, they'd be 40 cents, and the chews would be 7 cents because they're 3 less.
Yeah. Or it says 3 more than the lollipops.
Well, yeah.
So Sarah bought
3
2
more.
strawberry chews.
Oh no, it's not showing the video.
So if the
Oh, it is.
so
Yeah,
if
they
you
just
bought
can't see it.
Chews,
You can't see it, I'm sorry. But the
and
online
it
can.
costs- So it'd be 6 cents. It would be 6 cents above the lollipops because she bought 2. So I think we would do this one's a little tough. So she bought 6, or that'd be the cost of how much she bought, and then 4 lollipops. I keep saying that. Would we subtract 6 from 54?
There we go. That was good. I love his, oh, wait a second. This is a tough one.
Yes. And so that productive struggle is what we want to talk about when we talk about facilitating some ownership in mathematics. So as we switch over, can we see my slides again?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So facilitating student ownership, and during that previous clip, we saw the students in their little small breakout room discussing their ideas. But during the time as a teacher, we're monitoring and identifying those key points of discussion to share with a whole group in the synthesis. So specifically, the types of questions that were posed to students during the session, which as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner and outlined in red, that was the task that students needed to kind of think about and be able to discuss. And with the types of questions we now bring up as teachers in the synthesis section, we're either solidifying the student ownership or we're going to break down their competence. We must be intentional about fostering the ownership so that students build up their confidence by highlighting the connections that we heard in their thinking to the actual new learning that's taken place. So the questions specifically that students were given to explore just were a starting point for conversation. As you saw, it took them in other places. They really identified that, man, this one was a little bit more difficult. And yes, it was the most challenging on the page. But with these students, it allowed them to start kind of diving into what do we need to do? How do the numbers relate to each other? How did they get represented? And in the synthesis of the lesson, revisiting the importance of identifying that variable, which they talked about identifying as well, really stretches their reasoning within the capacity of the context. And so the video represents students moving from an understanding and starting to invest in it a little bit further because they stuck with it, they tried it, they just didn't skip and go to the next one. They were invested in it because they internalized the thinking process that developed their new learning. So how might we ensure this process continues along this learning continuum? And we must build in those authentic opportunities like you saw that discuss and demonstrate and allow students to show what learning and thinking they've got. So Elizabeth, how do we create authentic opportunities that demonstrate this learning?
Yes, let's go there. This is great. And I have to say, Stacey, that's one of my most favorite FALs to do, the formative assessment lessons to do with kids in middle school classrooms, in 7th and 8th grade, 8th grade specifically, and looking at finding that one little nugget of great thinking that the kids are latching onto, and then asking that great question that propels them to the next level. That's one of my favorite ones for seeing what kids know and can do.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, let's take a look then again at those 3 pillars of flexible assessment that Stacey was sharing a little bit ago in the opening session. So you guys, if there's one thing we've learned this year, we know flexibility is the key to 2020, right? So what does that mean for assessment? We know we've got to move beyond paper and pencil tests and quizzes, and a lot of us already have. So we're really looking for those authentic, flexible assessments that can occur over time. It should not be an isolated one-time deal. Assessment should be ongoing and measuring that progress towards a goal or mastery of a standard. The second one there, assessment should be in the form of feedback to allow students to monitor that progress towards their goals and mastery. So just like we saw in that FAL, what's that one thing that you could ask the students or point out to kind of help them move forward? What's that great feedback? And we have some elementary teachers that are gonna give us some insight into that this afternoon on the channel here. And then finally, there needs to be a balance of assessment for learning, not simply of learning. So that really is to say that it's integrated into the moves that the teacher is making throughout the lesson. Multiple points of assessment that are quick and targeted will, again, propel that learning forward in the lesson. So I recently got to watch a webinar put on by the Distance Learning Playbook authors, and it's linked in the slide deck if you'd like to go back and watch it. It was called Measuring Student Learning in Any Setting. And they focused on the guiding question of how do we even know what our students know, especially in virtual learning right now, working through a screen, how do we really know what our kids know and can do? And they focused on 5 types of assessment for virtual learning. And we're going to dive into 3 of these specifically. So let's start with the universal response. Universal response is targeted in the lesson. It's going to be a way for students to respond at the same time. So the real key idea here is that every kid is accountable for answering the prompt or giving their feedback simultaneously. And the research is showing that we should be using these types of micro assessments every 10 minutes at least in our synchronous session. So not only is that going to give us increased engagement and participation and accountability, but it's also going to give us those quick checks to make sure our lesson is on target and we're meeting our goals for that day. A lot of people are already using this in the form of the waterfall chat, right? We've seen classes where the teacher will give a prompt, ask everyone to type into the chat, but not hit enter until the teacher says waterfall. So that's a great way for every kid to be accountable for responding and having that opportunity to respond, but it reduces the follow the leader syndrome. So instead of the first student replying and then everyone kind of saying, oh yeah, I agree with that, and just kind of going along, kids really have to think about their own response. And then if their response is different, maybe it's incorrect or maybe it's just different from what they see their peers populating the chat with, it's really going to prompt those kids to consider what they know or think or what maybe they realize they don't know. So there's a lot more intentional thought that's happening on the part of the student, again, moving them more towards that investment and ownership of their learning. And of course, the teacher can give them feedback to everyone, not just to one student and play that ping pong game back and forth, but really think about the holistic and giving that formative assessment to every student at the same time. Stacey's going to talk to us next about an example for reciprocal teaching.
So teach back or reciprocal teaching is one that's been around for a while. And most of the time, teachers use it as a way to assist, to get some assistance in the classroom, but we want to change that idea. We don't want to use students as additional teachers, but we want to make this an assessment for learning so that they're working together more in a collaborative setting and learning from and with each other, and an opportunity to have some dialogue where students really start to see kind of the connection. A way that you can work with it, as you see on the screen, is this idea of retelling or using screencasts or Flipgrid. But also you can utilize breakout rooms or the synthesis portion of your lesson to really start to highlight some of the information. So here in just a moment, we're going to watch a clip of some of the same group of gentlemen that you saw earlier, but on a different lesson. And so within this lesson, this clip highlights how the teacher might facilitate identifying multiple approaches and making the connection to the new learning of solving equations in this case. Prior to this clip, students were engaged in this what if warm up to where they were bringing that concrete representation of a hanger diagram into the idea and kind of how do they find missing pieces for a variable. So during the explore part of the class, students engaged in small groups to where they took more the abstract representation of the equation and started to identify what might be some verbal descriptions of moves that they could make to keep the equation balanced, this idea of equality. And students had to determine which of the moves were appropriate. Now, within their work, they may or may not have in their own individual ideas taken that exact move, so they had to explore it a little bit further to see which move was still okay, which one was a balanced move. So in the clip, the clip shows the teacher acting as the scribe for two different students who share how they determined if a given equation was equivalent to one already solved on the screen. So here, listen closely for indicators of student ownership as well as some assessment for learning.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play that for us, okay?
What about equation one? Would somebody give you guys a minute, or if somebody wants to talk us through, with equation A here, would it be the same solution as this equation you just worked with?
Yes.
I think so. He's looked ahead. No. Correct. Yes, Malika. That was the question. Does equation A have the same answer of x equals 1? How did you figure that out so quick? Hold on. I got Malika. Malika?
All I did was put in 1 and 2 equation. It was times 1 minus 6, I got negative 4.
Okay,
And I did 4 minus
Shoot, no,
Nice.
you are speaking a heck of a lot faster than I can write. 2 times 1, negative 6, and that gave you what?
negative 4.
Okay.
And then this one I just did the same thing, 4 minus 8. And then 4 minus 8 times 1. And then I just put, and then that got me negative 4.
Okay, thank you so much. So all he did was just verify his solution by substituting in. Is that okay to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there another way, though, that I could have checked to see if x equals 1?
Yes.
What could I have done?
Well, first, I added 6 to the 4 because I do the inverse operation.
Awesome. Thank you for that vocabulary usage.
Oh, yeah. You already know.
I like it. Oop, that should be a 6. Caleb, yes, question.
Does inverse just mean backwards, pretty much?
Yeah, opposite.
Right. Okay. So I was asking.
Yeah, that's a big vocabulary word as you guys move into high school, that you'll hear inverse instead of the word opposite. So, got 2x equals, and then continue, Kane. Where were you going?
So then after that, I would have 10. I would have 2x equals 10 minus 8x.
Okay.
After that, what you gotta do, you gotta move the negative 8x over to the 2x.
Okay.
You gotta do the inverse, so then you add the 8x over to the 2x.
Beautiful. And I'm going sideways now.
And then once you divide the 10x by 10, you get 1 equals x. I mean x equals 1.
Oh. That's a 10.
Where'd you get 12?
I didn't mean to. I meant to do 10. Thank you.
Then you divide the 10x by 10, and you get x equals 1.
Thank you for catching my 12 too. So there's 2 methods, 2 ways you can do it. You can solve it out just like we would normally do by keeping things balanced with those inverse operations. But I could also, if I know the value, you could do exactly what Malachi did and substitute it in. So you have a couple of different ways in which you could check to see if it matches or not. So I want you guys to try this next one.
Awesome. That was exciting that they are like, wait a second, inverse. Does that mean opposite? I loved it.
Absolutely. So there were some key indicators there that the kid was owning his own learning. He was like, wait a minute, I don't understand what this vocabulary word means and what he's meaning in relation to this problem. But hey, I'm going to ask. But before the teacher could even respond, the kids supported him. They supported him as like, no, dude, it's just the opposite or the other backwards, and they really tried to work together in that collaborative learning. So this is an example of where those kids moved from that understanding phase to now they're invested in the problem and they're invested for and with each other. And so this sample, hopefully you heard some other key phrases or key things from not only the teacher but the student that then could lead us into this idea of peer and self-assessment that Elizabeth is going to take us through. So think about what are those key things within that clip and the other clips you've seen that not only are moving students along the continuum, but could be assessments for the learning.
Yeah, I love that. Stacey, we have to also stop and point out some of the amazing teacher moves that you did in that clip that made that possible for the students to have that conversation. When you had the hanger diagrams and as you were annotating the screen, those were making, that made all of their thinking visible so that the students could visualize it and hear what their peers were saying and help make sense of it. You had your questions pre-planned. I saw Andrea shout out in the chat, like the how questions. I mean, you had so many intentional moves through that lesson that facilitated that conversation for the kids so that they could have the opportunity to take ownership of their learning. And that goes back to those planning questions that we mentioned a little bit ago. So I don't want that to get lost. That was really, really important and very awesome. So, okay, let's dive into this because I know we're running short on time. So when students have the opportunity to engage in some peer assessment and in some self-assessment, we realize again that importance of our math community. So thinking all the way back to the beginning of the month, do our students feel safe to take risks and talk to each other and be vulnerable to share their thinking and their questions and their ideas, like we heard that group of boys? We've also seen some great examples, not just that one of the breakout rooms, but I'm thinking about the clip that Andrea showed last week from Mr. Stahl's classroom at Chansey, where he was popping in and out of breakout rooms as pairs of students were discussing one of those which one doesn't belong prompts. When the students returned to the main room, Mr. Stahl not only had evidence of their engagement and participation, but he also had evidence of math language and that vocabulary, like Elaine mentioned here too, and their depth of understanding. So how might we be able to use these conversations to formatively assess our students and also for students to assess themselves? Consider these suggestions for peer assessment in breakout rooms. When kids come back from their breakout rooms, if they have their cameras on, have them do a quick rating from 1 to 5 using their fingers to rate their breakout room conversation. What might it reveal if students in the same group have very different scores or very different experiences of that breakout room? There might be some implications for community or for content. How might students be able to rate their conversation specifically tied and related to the learning goals for that day? Or how might they be able to then set goals for future collaboration based on the norms that we have in our frameworks from Joe Bowler? And we have an image and a link to those here. These norms are really important messages to share with our students as we seek to move toward that learner-driven culture, where students are building their identity as mathematicians and taking ownership of their learning and growth. So think about for that self-assessment piece, how might students be able to reflect on maybe a chosen norm or specific area for growth? And how can we build that into our weekly and unit plans?
And so as we take this moment to kind of wrap up, we've highlighted a lot of the different components and things that have been shared over the past 2 weeks. So we want to highlight, if you've missed those, please feel free to click and go back and watch the videos on the previous 2 sessions that highlight some of these moves that we talked about today. We also want to draw your attention back at 12:30 as we have some great teachers talk about in the moment student-centered feedback that are used for assessment, as well as just really fostering that student ownership. And then we also want to draw your attention lastly to some of these great resources so that you can dive in your own time. So thank you for your time and attention. Elizabeth, I think it's been great. Elaine, we'll toss it back over to you.
Thank you, ladies, so much. I love learning from you guys. Thanks again for coming. So our next video is going to be on, our next session is going to be on science-specific ownership and assessment. And we have Lacey Eccles in this video with Kelly Radke and Elizabeth Schuler and Michelle Quinos and Brittany Hubert. So we are excited to learn from them. If you are just now joining us live, make sure that you join and put your name in the chat and go ahead and be a part of that conversation so that we can learn from one another there as well.
Hello, JCPS Science community, and welcome to our session on student-centered practices, brought to you today by myself, Lacey Eccles, K-12 Science Lead, and some very special guests. So even though we are in a digital setting, we have still got to believe that rich science learning can occur. And that happens in classrooms where students are positioned as knowledge constructors and sense makers, and where us as teachers leverage their experiences and ideas as the class works together to develop explanations for phenomena. But y'all, none of this can occur if we don't provide opportunities for students to engage. And so there are many components to constructing an equitable student-centered remote classroom. And in our previous digital learning channel PDs, we touched on several of these. If you haven't seen them, check them out on demand. Today, we're going to focus on 2 additional big rocks. student ownership in NTI, and NGSS assessments in NTI. So that first big rock, student ownership. We know that supporting all learners, and particularly those who have traditionally been left out of science, means instruction must reveal student thinking from a wide range of students. And to do so, tasks have actually got to be compelling to students, which means that instruction should be built around relevant and engaging phenomena and problems. We know that if students aren't motivated to engage in a lesson, they're definitely not going to demonstrate their best thinking. That second big rock for today is a big one. It's NGSS assessments. And so we know that science assessments designed for NGSS can and should come in all different forms. Really, that's true for all subject areas. And to really help all students develop proficiency in science, they're going to need feedback from different kinds of assessments, maybe quick checks during the process of learning, or deep dives, or authentic transfer tasks. And those assessments designed to tell us how our whole class is doing, or maybe our whole school is doing, or even our district. With so many different purposes and uses of assessment, it's kind of tricky to identify what really sets a three-dimensional assessment apart from a traditional assessment. But today, we're going to dive in a little bit to what research says those components might be, and also hear from some really amazing experts on how they are making these happen in their classroom. So let's take a dive into that first big rock, student ownership and equity. And so as educators, we've got to ensure that instruction and assessments are fair and equitable for all students in our classroom, and paying close attention to those students who traditionally may not see science as a space in which they are important contributors. In the classroom, instruction and assessments have got to be tailored to the specific interests and backgrounds and ideas and needs of our students. Think about it like using a local community-based phenomenon instead of some that students don't know anything about, or providing students options to make their thinking visible in multiple ways. And so on this slide, you're going to find 7 ways that research says a science classroom can promote student ownership and equity. So let's look at them real quick. The first one is relevance, and really one of the most important ones. We've got to provide students with tasks that are actually relevant to them, that they care about, that's interesting, that's related to their own life, or that's globally or universally meaningful. They are surrounded by science, guys, and we've got to find a way to connect them to what they're surrounded by. Different ways of knowing. We've got to encourage and support that there are multiple ways of knowing as avenues for success, not just one way of knowing. We've also got to provide them with multiple on-ramps, right? So we've got to include appropriate scaffolds and on-ramps and cues that help all students connect the task and engage in sense-making. We know our students have multiple different backgrounds, and so we've got to respect and advantage their cultural and linguistic backgrounds. And then we've got to use accessible language, right? Science language often is a barrier to student success. So we've got to use some accessible language and provide multiple ways for students to make their thinking visible so that everyone can demonstrate progress. And then we've got to build up their confidence. We've got to cultivate their interest in and confidence with science by valuing their ideas as actual part of the task through connections to maybe their lived experiences or even classroom-specific experiences. And last but not least, we've got to provide students with opportunities to monitor and recognize their own progress. And that can look multiple different ways based on what students need. So three-dimensional science standards a la NGSS are going to raise several questions about how we monitor student progress. What does it look like to ask students to demonstrate progress towards 3D standards? Or what are the features that actually make a high-quality task? Well, research from Achieve highlights 5 really important features. And so I want to briefly talk about them before we dive in and talk to some teachers. The first feature is to be focused on a phenomenon or problem. I feel like a broken record. I'm saying the word phenomenon over and over and over and over again. And that's on purpose, y'all. That's the first thing we've got to be concerned about in instruction, which means it also needs to be reflective in assessment. If we want assessments to really reveal what students know and can do, they've actually got to be motivated to engage in that task. And to support all learners, we've got to choose phenomena and or problems that are rich and compelling to students who are seeing the task. We want our assessments to be reflective of our instruction. Then we've got to require students to engage in some sense making. And this is perhaps the most important shift for NGSS instruction and then NGSS assessments. We've got to ask students to actively engage in sense making as the actual goal of the assessment. So guys, that means the assessment tasks have got to emphasize reasoning as the way students show their understanding of science ideas, rather than a rote memorization of facts or a rote memorization of procedures. That's not assessment anymore for NGSS. And then in tasks, guys, sense making happens when students have to apply all of the science and engineering practices, their understanding of those core ideas or cross-cutting concepts. Which leads us to the next one, which is we have to require students to use both science ideas and science practices. So from exit tickets all the way up to final exams. Students have got to be required to use at least one science and engineering practice and one core idea together as part of their sense-making process. This is the floor, not the ceiling. The more comprehensive the assessment, the higher the bar for what students need to demonstrate, a la SCPs, CCCs, and DCIs. We've also got to make sure our assessments are equitable. They should be relevant, authentic, meaningful to students. Classroom-based assessments experiences can be powerful mechanisms to build student agency and identity as scientists or as engineers. And then the last one seems simple, but is one that we still need to highlight, is that they support the intended purpose and use. Tasks have different purposes, right? And it's important that each task is designed to provide some type of evidence to meet whatever that purpose is. For example, we might have a lesson exit ticket, and it might focus on an itty-bitty specific part of a practice, or a part of a core idea, or maybe those together, part of a cross-cutting concept that was addressed during the lesson. While an end of the course kind of final exam might emphasize students' ability to transfer that understanding to new contexts and use multiple practices and multiple core ideas and cross-cutting concepts together. So it's critical that assessments are designed to support that intended purpose and use, and that we're transparent to students about what's being assessed and the purpose of that assessment. So if we take what we know about Big Rock number 1 on student ownership and Big Rock number 2 on NGSS assessment, we should have assessments that hold true to these 4 tenets. First one is that they're meaningful. Tasks that authentically connect to students' experiences and ideas are grounded in students' backgrounds, make them meaningful. Assessments, guys, can be empowering. Tasks that value student ideas, that provide students with choices about which evidence to use or how to go about addressing a phenomenon or problem, and provide these real opportunities for students to figure out something that matters to them. Assessments are accessible. Tasks that use easy to understand words. We don't need these big, crazy assessments. Simple sentence structure, they have scaffolds, and they provide several ways for students to make their thinking visible. Maybe it's through written language, maybe it's through a model, maybe it's through verbal responses. And then lastly, they're fair. Tasks that ask students that students have had sufficient learning experiences to participate in fully, and include feedback that accounts for multiple ways of knowing that students may be leveraging. So, that was a lot of me talking, but I have a treat for you. I'm gonna stop talking. Instead of me talking to you about all the different strategies that you might be able to use, we've called in the experts. We have a panel of 4 teachers from all over our district here to talk to you about how they take those pillars and make them come to life in their classroom, and what adaptations they might have to have made due to NTI. So think about the next 15 minutes as a low budget, late night science talk show where our guests might not be starring in the next blockbuster, but they are doing a job that is way harder keeping a student-centered focused science classroom during virtual instruction. So let's see what they have to say. So, if we know that research suggests that personal interest is such an important factor, how are you guys tapping in to students' personal interests in the science classroom? Kelly, you are an elementary school STEM teacher. Do you have anything for us?
Sure. So what I've noticed, especially during NTI, is that if my instruction is relevant to kids, they're going to be so much more engaged and willing to continue to engage in the work. I found what's most successful for me right now is in the use of project-based learning units. So where I'm giving kids a problem that they find relevant and then allowing them to guide how they solve the problem. It's really created a whole new level of engagement for me. So as an example, I've introduced to our fourth graders the idea of Bowen Saves the Bees. Our school mascot is the bees, and so we're on a mission to save them and our local population. So I've just facilitated some research for them to help them understand what the problems are facing bees. We've introduced them to a local beekeeper, and then pulled back the reins and gave them an opportunity to express how they want to solve the problem. So these fourth grade friends are coming at it from 3 different fronts right now. I've got kids who are designing and creating a pollinator garden, bee habitats, and a Google site to educate others about the importance of bees and highlight their work. And they've taken it so much further than I ever would have had I just planned a whole unit and started teaching through it.
Well, I noticed very quickly that when our kiddos got back together after this, the last part of their 5th grade year, they were NTI, and then they had to start middle school in 6th grade, very nervous, very scared. And so we had some chatting time, and it became very evident that they were into video games, many video games. So we were thinking, okay, we need to get them excited about science and not just hearing the teacher talk to them, but maybe actually interacting with something. So the PhET simulations have saved the day. The colorado.phet.edu, is that correct?
Yeah, spot
so
on.
For us, it's been fantastic. Force in Motion, they were able to actually learn about Newton's second law before we even said a word. They were able to go on and just interact with that program, basically play on that digital background. And they were able to go, wait a second, I noticed that when I put 2 men over here and then I put 1 figure over here, it went this way. So they were actually talking it through without even using the word force, without using the word mass, without using the word accelerate, but they knew what it meant.
But how are we taking students' cultural backgrounds or linguistical backgrounds and advantaging those in the classroom? Does anybody have any tips or tricks that you've been using?
I have a couple that I have found to be helpful for me. Just because I don't know my students as well as I usually would. So starting off the year, I would get to know them, and then I would be able to be like, this relates to you because I know this about you, and this relates to you because I know this about you. So just taking the time, like whenever I start a new unit or even a new lesson, and saying like, what have you heard about this idea or what do you know? And it doesn't have to be right. It just has to be, you don't even have to believe it. Just what are things that you've heard about it? And then like using that to kind of give me a path through so that I can keep it related back to them throughout. That's one thing that I found really helpful, especially because I have a lot of kids from a lot of different cultures. So there are some ideas, I feel like as a science teacher, I'm like, oh, I'm well aware of all these misconceptions. And then they throw these things out and I'm like, oh, I've never heard about that before. Like I had no idea that idea existed. And so it's helpful for me to get to know the kids and help them connect what they've experienced to what we're going to be learning.
I just had one quick example. I have a student from Brazil. She is a brand new English speaking student. So we're working through that many different ways. But she is actually currently in Brazil until we're done with break. And so when we were talking about seasons and the fact that whatever happens in the Northern Hemisphere you can predict what's happening in the Southern Hemisphere because it will be the opposite. So it was perfect timing that we are entering winter here in Kentucky. And then she was able to talk about how they were wearing their sundresses and their flip-flops there on the beaches of Brazil. So that the kids were like, aha. So it really made it real for them.
That's so cool.
Can I piggyback on that really quick? Because it made me think of something. I give my students surveys about what is going well and what isn't going well. And I have quite a large amount of ESL students. And one thing that I have done is on, not every slide, but on slides where like there is a really big science idea that I really need them all to know, I'll translate it into every language that I know is spoken in my classes, and I put them in little bubbles on the slide. And so I've had students tell me like that's really helpful because it just doesn't feel so intimidating to them. And so that way, even if there are some things that they're not picking up on, they at least can feel assured that they're getting access to those big science ideas.
Are any of you providing opportunities for students to monitor their own progress and recognize their own progress as we're kind of navigating these NTI waters or even navigating the NGSS waters? Schooler, you got anything for us?
Yes, ma'am. So oftentimes in my class, I'll give students a weekly science reflection, and I will either prompt them with a question or give sentence starters for them to use to judge what went well for them this week in class and identify what they truly mastered and maybe what they might need a little bit practice more on. So then when we have office hours, I'm able to invite those students in and give them one-on-one or in a group setting and even mixed classes and mixed ability levels to really make sure that those students are capturing what we need them to know out of those standards while making it still on topic with what they need. They're telling me what they need rather than me telling you or them, this is what you need to know, which then really makes it cool because it buys into their interest. So they are now seeing that Miss Schooler, cares. She's going to listen to what I need and provide me with that instruction. So I'm not worried about necessarily what score I get. I'm worried with what I can master.
Let's look at that second big rock, assessments. A big challenge, right, facing teachers as they shift instruction to meet NGSS is how are we assessing it? What does assessment look like? How do we bring the way we're doing instruction over into assessments? And really, let's think about this through two lenses, right? Let's think about it through the lens of how has your assessment shifted a la NGSS? Right? So we have that kind of rock to talk about, but also you might have shifted your assessment a la NGSS, but now you've been asked to shift again a la NTI. So Radke, can you talk to us about either one or the other or both about how you're having to shift assessment with your elementary school babies in your STEAM lab, my bad.
That's okay, absolutely. Even before NTI, just going into NGSS, I found that using Google Forms has been a really great way for me to get a quick snapshot at the end of the class period, using it more as an exit ticket where I can see what content they've picked up pretty quickly, and then being able to take that information, as Google Form puts that into a spreadsheet, I can look at trends among the class and among the entire grade levels, just to see where they are for a quick formative assessment.
One thing that I would like to transition into NTI and even back into when we go back into the classroom is allowing students multiple chances to show mastery on assessments. And since that is coming down to us from our tried and true leader, Polio, of giving students multiple opportunities to master standards, letting them retake stuff and not necessarily offering them a retake, but okay, you struggled with an assessment that was an A/B format. Could you tell me about it? Could you come to office hours and maybe you need to tell me about it? Could you draw it out for me and hold it up in front of your camera so that I know that you understand the model? So offering them multiple chances in multiple ways, even though we're online, to see what they can master.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think that that's a great combination kind of our two rocks, right? Of student ownership and assessments, multiple ways of making student thinking visible as well as still staying true a la NGSS. What
And
about
then
high school,
we-
Brittany? Oh, hold on, Q has something to say.
Oh, well, I was just going to mention that for my English language learners, it's very difficult for many of them to actually be able to describe what it is they're trying to say, kind of like I just did. So it's helpful if we set up an actual time that we can Google Meet just the two of us or the three of us, and we can discuss it. They can show me, pictures of what maybe they're meaning, or they try to come up with words to explain, and they don't have to feel nervous doing that.
Unmute. So I also am a huge proponent of multiple opportunities. And we did this before NTI as well, of giving students a question and having them answer it at the beginning before we start the lesson. And then we chunk it, we learn a little bit of new material, and now we go back and we add answers in a new color. And then we learn a little bit more and we go add answers in a new color. And so they really get to see how their ideas have changed. And so then we can also provide them feedback so that by the end of the lesson, they don't even have to fail it the first time and then come back and try it again. They are revising as they go, and I've had a lot more success at the end if I chunk it. But in NTI, it has been a little bit harder because a lot of times I just use faces as formative assessments. Well, you're not going to get it because you're not even looking at me. You're looking at the ceiling. And so I don't get to use faces for formative assessment anymore. So I've started to rely really heavily on Pear Deck. And I will ask a question and I have them give their answers, and then I share some of the answers and we talk about what's right or wrong. And then we learn a little bit more and they give their answers, and then I can share those answers and they can pull from those answers to give their own final answer on their own assignment. And so Pear Deck has been a really good way for me to formative assess without being able to see their faces. And it's what I use daily. They just know that all their answers are going into Pear Deck for me.
We talked earlier, and you've heard me say this several times: phenomena, problem, phenomena, problem. And so they really have become central to any conversations about science teaching, science learning, science instructional materials. And so if we want assessments to truly show what students know and can do, and we really want assessments to be reflective of what they've done in class, then assessments too should likely incorporate phenomena and problems. And honestly, our state test incorporates phenomena and problems. And so how are you guys shifting some of your assessments to be more reflective of that kind of critical component of NGSS?
I can start on this one. So for STEAM instruction, we utilize the engineering design process, and it's been a big shift for us. But during the first step is ask. And so during that step, that's when I'm doing all those formative assessments I mentioned, collecting those Google Forms, looking at what science content they've learned. But then as we move on through imagine, plan, create, and improve, I'm using that as my assessment. Did the kids learn the science content they needed to learn in order to create a model or a system that solves the problem that was asked?
I don't think that it actually looks much different. We choose our phenomena, which there's 1,000 websites out there that have interesting phenomena linked to every NGSS standard you can think of. And so our assessment is really the same. We give them this confuzzling phenomena and we ask them, what do you think's happening? And so that can be in a written explanation or that can be a model. And then just as we go through, they continue to revise it. And so I'm assessing them formatively on their revisions, but really that ends up being the summative assessment too, is can you explain it? And can you explain the science ideas behind it? And maybe it's the same phenomena, or maybe it's a new phenomena with the same science ideas. But yeah, I think it looks a lot the same at the high school level.
What about middle school level? Q, schooler?
Okay, so one of the things that, again, looks very similar. However, I'll just use an example. How about a specific example? So with the moon phases, okay, is it really that, the way our PLC looks at it is it really that important that the kids can look at a model and name every moon phase. Okay, maybe back 10 years ago that was, but now what we like to do is, okay, kiddos, last night we looked up and we saw it was a full moon. Okay, we saw the entire lit portion of the moon. So in 10 days, what do you predict will happen if you go outside and look up? If there's no clouds, of course. And because we like to argue that as well in 6th grade. But it's interesting to see them try to figure out, they're like, okay, well, each phase takes da-da-da. And so then I go here. Oh, that's going to be a waxing or a waning gibbous or a waxing crescent. So then they're actually getting that information. So it's pretty cool. And if they can't name it, they can at least describe it. They'll say, well, I know that the darkness is going to be on the right-hand side. And so we've really talked a lot about describing what it is. What are you predicting is going to happen? And I think they kind of like it. It's almost like a mystery game to them, right?
I think that's what a phenomena is, right? Like, it is a big, giant mystery that we're trying to figure out. And it sounds to me like you're really having students use those cross-cutting concepts, right? Of thinking about patterns that they might see, or kind of that sense-making tool, versus like what you said 10 years ago, we did used to assess kids on memorizing the phases of the moon. That was absolutely questions on K-Prep. You will not see that anymore. However, I think that's a really good point and a really good example to kind of point out that A, you made it relevant to kids, right? So you're taking that first pillar, and then B, you're designing an assessment a la NGSS where they're having to use a cross-cutting concept. And it wasn't some big magical assessment. It was a pretty simple, straightforward, like, do you understand the pattern that happens when we think about moon phases? That's a great example.
It has now gotten to the point where kids, when they get online, like right as classes start, Miss Q, I found a pattern. That's fantastic. Tell me all about your pattern.
I want to end our show by thinking back to those two big ideas, right? Student ownership and NGSS assessments. And we know that there's not only one ingredient that is going to help students with student ownership or assessment, that every teacher finds an approach that works best for them. However, I do think today we found some common threads and themes across K-12, which is pretty a beautiful thing, right? And that's the purpose of NGSS, it's K-12. Isn't that beautiful? And so hopefully some of the amazing ideas of this panel of instructors will resonate with you, and you will take a nugget back and give it a try. And so we really thank you for your time, and hopefully we will see everybody again soon. Thank you.
That was awesome. Lots of great information going on for our viewers, and I want to thank that panel. They did so well that day, and I know that if they were able to join in and watch it live, showing, and then also answer some of those questions in the chat if you had any. So up next, it is 10 o'clock, and I see my sweet friend Suzanne here. Hello, Suzanne. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Elaine. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited that we are going to be talking about ELA-specific ownership and assessment next, and we have a couple more people that are going to be joining you. Are they going to join on the chat side, or are they going to be able to come in and be with us on the live session?
So we have folks monitoring the chat from CDLI, and yesterday I recorded an interview with my colleagues at Olmsted Academy South about how they're building ownership and authentic assessment in the ELA classroom. And so I'm just going to introduce kind of the 4 tenets of that for ELA really quickly, and then I have that recording embedded in the slide deck. So hopefully that will work, and they did an awesome job. So I'm really excited for teachers to hear from them. They're doing excellent work over there with those girls.
Great.
All right, so I will, and Elaine, if I'm doing anything wrong, please jump in and save me. And I am assuming I need to keep my Hangout unmuted so folks will be able to hear the recording. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, and I will turn on my closed captions. Okay. So today we're going to be hearing from some 8th grade ELA teachers and their cooperating EL, English learner teacher from Olmsted Academy South. We're going to have another panel interview that deals with the most salient questions around creating space for ownership and assessment in ELA. And so our goals will be thinking about how we nurture that ownership and how we create authentic opportunities for demonstrating learning. And so we're going to focus on choice, feedback, discourse, formative practices, and performances. So our 4 tenets of ownership and authentic assessment in ELA are number 1, always ensuring that roadmap, that quality backward design, embedding choices in process, product, and text, establishing feedback loops, and focusing on performance assessments that integrate both reading and composition. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play this recorded panel interview. Our teachers will be Sarah Bryant, Jennifer Mischke, and Stephanie Roeder from Olmsted Academy South. We have an excellent language arts panel with us today from Olmsted South, our 8th grade team. So we want to welcome Jennifer Mischke, Sarah Bryant, and Stephanie Roederer. Thanks so much for being here, you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So today we are going to dig into how these tenets of ownership and assessment are built into their practices. And so when we talk about quality backward design, it seems like something we always come back to, a pretty simple idea, but it really matters to these 2 pieces in particular. This morning, we learned about the 8 elements that make up classroom culture. These are captured particularly in the interdisciplinary literacy practices in ELA. Classrooms and the workshop model must be set up intentionally in order to center formative assessment and demonstrations of learning. We have to know where we're headed to build in authentic tasks and set up routines and structures to build in student ownership. And so with that, I'd like to ask a few questions of our panel about how they ensure a quality backward design, answering those first couple of questions in the PLC process. So how do you all approach mid-range unit planning or short-term planning during NTI, and why does it matter to your practice?
I'll start us off. As a department, we looked at the state standards. I mean, that was the very, very beginning was looking at our standards, especially when we shifted over to the new Kentucky standards. And we looked at it as a kind of vertical alignment so that we kind of paid attention to what was essential that might be not be covered in 7th grade or 6th grade or be covered differently. And so once we had figured out what our real essential standards were for 8th grade, then we've been using the EL education curriculum as kind of our core. And our awesome department chair, Sarah, went through all of the modules that EL offers and figured out which ones best align to our essential standards. So we picked out our modules based on which ones hit those essential standards the most. And that's kind of what we based our choice on. And then we literally work backwards from the end of module tasks that we want them to do. And then we figure out what makes sense. So sometimes we're tweaking those end of unit standards or end of the modules. We're tweaking them to make sure that they best align with those essential standards we picked. And that really helps us to focus in when we're working in PLC on, what's coming up next or what we're going to assess next. It really helps us to narrow the focus to, does this fit with those things we said were most important? And Sarah is really awesome at designing rubrics that are really focused on, these are the things that we said mattered. And so she kind of ends up taking the lead on our rubrics and setting it up so that when we're assessing something, we know that we're only looking at the things that are aligned to those essential standards. As far as distance learning, we've filtered out anything that isn't absolutely focused on, again, those essential standards. So if it's not going to help them get to that end result, we kind of can't do it, because we find that our kids get overwhelmed if we give them too much. So we're really trying to just narrow it down to this is what's most important. And so that's really what it comes down to. So a lot of times our PLC conversation will be, here's what we said we wanted to assess, and is this going to fit, or should we cut it out, or how should we do it? And we kind of are working around which things are essential and which aren't. So,
and I have to give Stephanie credit that so much of that comes back to our PLC meetings. She's our PLC lead, and she does an excellent job of guiding us towards the next step and keeping that focus. So she actually, like, it's me, but it's all her.
How do you think that backward planning and that exceptionally focused prioritization of critical learning benefits your EL students, Jennifer?
Well, we've gone through a few phases of like simplifying our instruction for NTI. And I think that keeping focused on our end goal and our essential standards really allows us to provide our ELs with like an equitable education, in the sense that we're striving for grade level standards for everybody. And we're striving towards those essential grade level standards. So kind of clearing everything else out of the way to focus on doing well with that, I think really supports them, but also challenges them in the right way.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to our second pillar, excuse me, which is connected to ownership, and that is choice. And we know that choice drives engagement and ownership. And in ELA, we want to think about how we can offer choice in process, in product, and in text. So I have a few questions about that for you all. How have you incorporated these three types of choice, and which one has been most effective, do you think, during NTI? Which type of choice?
I think process and product are the main ones that we've done the most with so far this year. We have a core text that we're reading as a class, which is part of the EL education curriculum. But what we love about the way that curriculum is set up is, and the way we've kind of tried to set it up is, if a student doesn't love the book or they're behind on the reading or whatever, they can still be successful with the standards. So we are close reading specific. In this case, it's poems from the story, but we're doing the close readings together. We're assessing those close readings, but we're kind of filling in the details in between, so that if a kid is behind on the reading or something like that, or maybe they just don't love the book and they would rather read something different, so they've got a little bit of choice. They're not forced to read every word of a book that they just couldn't get into. As far as process goes, our schedule is set up where we see our kids at like either Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and we have kind of worked it out where we start out with, here's the core of our like mini lesson, here's what we're teaching you, and then we've started using the period of time after our class we call it brave time. It's for like small groups and things like that. We're now using it as a workshop. So if students want us to work side by side with them, if they want to work with a small group, or in some cases, if we want them to work with a small group, or if they would rather, it's too noisy and they need to go work somewhere else right now, they've got a lot of flexibility in the where and when they work. And then as far as product, for the module that we're doing this semester, we changed the end product from what EL had kind of had set up, and we opened it up to be, because of the 180 days cohort, we opened it up to be more about the student stories and using their stories to show that they understood our analysis of character and how it's developed. So they get a choice basically to write their own story. So that's a very wide choice. At the end of the year, at some point in the year, they're going to have a choice on which piece they want to take to publication. So it may not be their narrative piece. It may be a different piece that we do later on. And I would say overall, we are really flexible with kids. I've been telling them, I'm not here to stifle your creativity. So if you've got an idea of something that you want to take this further and you want to go beyond the prompt, as long as you can meet these couple of things on the rubric. Beyond that, you can be as creative as you want to be. And if you're somebody that hates writing and like narrative writing just is not your thing, then you can still be successful on our goals by getting you can still be successful without being the best writer in the world, so that you're still meeting those core things that we need you to do.
Thank you. Jennifer, how do you ensure that your EL students have access to choice?
So we are providing our main ESL services through co-teaching language arts this year. And we give them the same assignments that we give other students. I might kind of go in Google Classroom and put some extra supports in there. I might pull kids into a small group for extra help, but they're getting the same assignments and the same lessons, and therefore they're getting the same choices as other students. But I do think there's also, NTI has allowed us the opportunity to have more choice in process. Something that's been kind of hard for me to wrap my head around is the pacing that students choose with their assignments. We're very flexible, maybe too flexible, about our due dates. So I'll have kids who come to my small group every day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, why haven't they started? And then eventually they do, and they work at their own pace. And I've been really impressed with some of the work that they've been able to produce using whatever time they need. But another thing we've done recently for process is, in this narrative that our students are writing, we took the rubric and turned it into a checklist. And for each item on that checklist, we have some differentiated resources that we collectively created and embedded with examples of both student and teacher models. So if a student feels like they've got dialogue down, they don't really need to probably pursue those dialogue resources. But if they're struggling with how to write a engaging introduction, then they can explore those resources.
And I think it's important that when we first started planning that, we actually had like a step-by-step, here's how to write your narrative. And we were like, they're gonna follow this process together. And then we just had a moment of, is that really what we want them to do? We've already helped them think about ideas with Think Circa modules. They've already written some. Are we really asking them to go backwards in their planning process? And then we finally came to, no, we need to give them the big prompt. We need to give them the space to just write, but we need to offer the scaffold. And so one of the things on the checklist that Jennifer just mentioned is, do you have your narrative organized into paragraphs? Do you have sequence of events? If you don't, you might want to use this planning document. But I think writing overall has been where we've offered the most choice. Even in the Think Circa modules, we've offered them the opportunity to choose which topic, which led to different variations of the grade level text that's associated with it. But we felt like that was okay because we are still focused on grade level text as the meat of our learning. So we thought it was more important for the students to be interested in what they're writing and to have a connection to it and to get them writing, and to worry about the model text. So I think writing has been where we've incorporated the most choice.
Thanks so much. And in listening to both of you talk about that, it sort of goes back to that initial pillar around a quality backward design, because you're not able to offer those choices in process or product or any of that if you kind of don't know where you're going. And Jennifer, when you were talking about, kids are really working at their own pace. There is a lot of sort of personalization of process just by the sheer nature of what we're engaged in here. But if you all were not, if you hadn't set up those structures, if you didn't have a plan, you didn't know at the beginning of every week the learning that was essential for that week, it would be much more challenging for students to be moving at their own pace and still learning, right? And so I think those two pieces really work together. So thanks for sharing that. So our third pillar is feedback, and we know that for writers, dollops of specific, actionable, descriptive feedback is one of the highest efficacy things we can do to move writers forward. And in some ways, NTI has made descriptive feedback more efficient. In other ways, it's more challenging given that things are, coming in at different due dates, things like that you already just mentioned. So I'm interested in learning how you're using Pear Deck and other strategies for live feedback. And then, Stephanie, I'd love for you to talk about how you're prioritizing feedback on student work and what your process is based on a recent conversation that we had.
I can start with the Pear Deck piece and then hand it off to Stephanie. First of all, I'm super excited because Pear Deck now has co-teacher mode. So Sarah and I don't have to take turns starting the Pear Deck each week. We both can see what the kids are doing at all times. But I was telling you earlier, we had this really cool moment yesterday where we were asking kids to experiment with language, and Sarah found this beautiful picture of this like mountain town set up for Christmas, and we were asking students for the warm-up to use descriptive language to really describe that setting. And in the Google Meet, there was a student who was like so excited to share. She's like, can I share mine? Can I share mine? So I go over to the Pear Deck, and she didn't really have descriptive language in hers. So I gave her some feedback on the Pear Deck and an example. And then she comes back over to the Google Meet and says, can you check it again? And I go back over to the Pear Deck, and she had done it so much better that time. So I was, yes, you really got it. And she was like, now I really understand what you mean when you say descriptive language. And this is the kid who's the one who am I done yet? Am I done yet? So it was a fun moment. But for anybody who's not using Pear Deck, one thing that's really cool about it is the fact that you can go in and give kids feedback on the spot, and they get a little alert that brings their attention back to it.
Another thing about Pear Deck that I've started using that I like, if you're using like a warm-up and you're using the text thing where they're responding, if I have kids that are reluctant to get started, I'll open my own version and kind of start mine, and that'll kind of get them going. And then in the dashboard, I can see as they're working, who's working on it. I can star the ones that are good examples, and then I just share the responses and show them. And it's kind of neat because they like trying to guess whose is the ones that I decided to share. Oh, that's so-and-so's. And they're like, no, it's not mine. And, so I like to show them those models and point out certain things that they're doing. With my high-performing classes, I might even say, you know what, I bet we could lift this writing if we did this. But I try to not discourage my struggling learners too much. I really try to focus on, look at this awesome thing that she did. Look what a great job she did describing this. Or I really love how you took this angle, or things like that, to kind of get them to notice the positive things. And then, like with that same picture, the mountain town and it's snowy, I challenged one of my classes today to tell me about what they would smell, because it's a picture, but I'm like, what do you think you'd be smelling at this point? And they were talking about hot chocolate and like all this different stuff that they thought kind of went with it, and so it was kind of neat. But so that's really nice to be able to use Pear Deck to show them models like in the moment. I also use it, and I'll go down and I'll go, oh, so-and-so started her warm up. Okay, great. I had one today, and I was like, what are you doing, hun? Why does it say that? And she's like, oh, I didn't understand, and then she tweaked it, and, so it's kind of nice that they know I'm looking at it and I'm checking it, and I'm literally checking as I'm going that they're doing it. And then as far as the feedback on student work, NTI has been hard because we kind of get caught up in the trying to track down the kids that don't show up, or we get caught up in the need to call the parents that the kids aren't doing the work and all that stuff. And I realized that I kept putting time into that and then getting behind on giving the feedback as fast as I could or should, really. So and Suzanne said a great thing, that there's no one else who can give my kids descriptive feedback. And she said that last week in a meeting, and I was like, duh. So my priority from now on is to put first on my to-do list the things that only I can do. And then if it's something that someone else can do, I'm going to try to to delegate, ask for help from the staff in my building, which I've already done, and it's helping a lot. But when I'm giving feedback, if I tell my kids, if you go ahead and turn in your narrative early, I will do a pass through and give you feedback. One of the things I love about NTI and feedback is I keep like a Google Doc of a lot of the kind of comments that I tend to use repeatedly, and I literally can just copy and paste those in. I also have started collecting some other resources. Like, I realize that some kids don't understand how to, like, where to break paragraphs in a narrative. So I've got a link to just that list of, like, here's all the times that you start a new paragraph. And so I can just drop a link to that. Or I can drop I have a lot of kids that are using comma splices. And so I found a really simple video that explains what a comma splice is. And I'm like, hey, take a look at this and then go back and correct these. So there's a lot of individualized feedback in that, where that's in regard to that. Same thing with our office hours and our workshop time after our mini lesson. Kids can stay and I can pull up their work and we can talk through it as they're going. And so that's been really helpful. There's a lot of practices like that that I am looking forward to doing better in my classroom. Things that I wanted to do better before, that now I have a better understanding of how it's going to work, I guess, once kids are physically in the room. So I think,
I think that another opportunity we have with NTI is to give them written feedback, but also to give them auditory feedback at the same time. Jennifer introduced us to the talk and comment, where you can actually just click, you can record something, and then you can put a comment in there. And I have found during our writers workshop time that sometimes the girls ask for feedback and we'll, give them feedback orally, but then I'll go and I'll add just a few short comments to their work to follow up. And I think that helps them when they come back around, because sometimes we hear the feedback, but then you get to your work and you're like, oh, what did she say? So I think that in NTI, we have the opportunity to give them feedback in multiple forms, and it allows them to do more with it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that auditory feedback is also really helpful to your EL students, right? Because then they're not having to read all of your comments, but that's, supporting, if they have developed their conversational language more quickly than their academic, which we know is typical, that really supports their getting equitable access to your feedback. So that's an excellent, excellent tool. I'm sure we're going to have people reaching out on how to do that, Jennifer and Sarah, so I'll be pointing them in your direction. So our last piece here is performance assessment. And this is the most really important piece for ownership and authentic assessment. And so thinking about how can we avoid divorcing reading from writing, right? We know that reading and writing are reciprocal processes, or standards are not meant to be designed in isolation. We want students to be assessed where they are composing and that they are referencing text in that composition, right? We want to bundle those standards together. And as we think about performance assessment, we also want to be thinking about transfer task, authentic audiences, and those sorts of things. But I'm really interested from how you all are ensuring that your performance assessments are bringing reading and writing together. And then I know you've been really intentional about success criteria. So I'd love for you all to speak about how you're incorporating that in your assessments as well.
I'm super excited about the way that we're blending reading and writing skills in our current end of module assessment. So we've mentioned that students are writing a narrative. And as we read the novel for this current module, students were analyzing character traits and how the character was dynamic throughout the story. So that's what we're asking them to do in their narrative, is to show when they learned something about themselves, character trait, or a time when they realized a change in themselves and that they were dynamic. And then on top of that, the next piece is that we're going to have them analyze their own writing. So we've had a focus on students writing responses with evidence and reasoning.
All right, so in the interest of time, I am going to go ahead and stop us there. I want to keep us on track here on the digital learning channel, but Elaine has kindly agreed to splice in when we have this sort of published video. We'll have the whole interview with Olmsted South spliced into the intro and the conclusion of this video, because what they go on to talk about with performance assessment is so important. And so the K-12 team just wanted to leave all of our viewers with a list of tools for building out those classroom systems for ownership and assessment. And so here you'll see the tools that are literacy specific or a great fit for ELA in building ownership and authentic assessment. And so if you need any support on any of these pieces, please feel free to reach out to our K-12 team, and we really appreciate all you're doing for students and families during this time. So with that, it is 10:29, and so I just want to make sure my next colleagues get to start on time and throw it back to you, Elaine. Thank you so much for having us today.
Absolutely, Suzanne. Definitely those, a lot of that really spoke to me, and I know that it spoke to our viewers as well. And then that entire video will be available on demand, as always, shortly. So Suzanne, thank you again for all your hard work, and please send our appreciation to those other teachers as well, from us as well. So up next we have social studies specific ownership and assessment, and we have Ryan and Vincent, and Rebecca is she chat side?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate if there's anything for you coming today. If there's anything that I can do to assist, just let me know.
Will do. Well, thank you very much for having us. Vince and I are very excited to talk to you guys about scaffolded single point rubrics, or single point scaffolded rubrics. It's going to be both. And we're going to have a session later on today where we actually have a teacher that is actually using these in the 6th grade about being able to give meaningful, authentic feedback. And so, Vincent, are you ready for this?
Yes, good morning, everybody. So today we're going to be looking at 2 different rubrics that we have, very similar in style and structure. The first one is the one we're going to spend the bulk of our time in to demonstrate that style and structure, and that is our formative performance task single point scaffolded rubric. It's a mouthful for our grades 6 through 12 here. If you're looking at our rubric, this is a Google Doc version of it that you see on the right. Looks like there's a lot going on. All the rubric fits on one single page. There is a lot happening here, but I really want to focus that there's really just 2 sections on here that we're looking at, and we tried to include those sections right here. The first one that you see is that we have our formative performance task at the very top that teachers would choose between. And then the second section that you see here is our assessment criteria. Both of these sections are what we're going to go into more detail in this presentation. Before we talk about our task section, these are action verbs that you see in social studies standards, words that are cueing teachers up within the standards on what they should be doing. You see a whole variety of words, and what we've tried to do is organize some of this language into what the processes actually are. So if you look here on the left, you see that there's some language that goes with thinking about assessing and evaluating and analyzing, but kind of hard to demonstrate how students are analyzing or examining. We have some words and language that is about doing, which is using and applying and gathering and so on. And we've organized some of the language under the task over here that can really help demonstrate that. So how would you demonstrate and assess or an analyze or create or develop? Our position with our rubric is that the language that you see on the far right here is some of the language you see within the standards on how we would go about doing that. And you could do that through a description, an explanation, a claim, or an argument. So you could develop an idea through the disciplinary lens, through an explanation. You can generate it through an argument, or so on. That the tasks are really how the student would be demonstrating that knowledge and that way of thinking. We've actually added one in that you're going to see on our scaffold, which is generalizations, and we insert that between description and explanation, simply because we see that as a logical gap between the 2. So this is the top part that you would see on our rubric. And this is an annotated version of that rubric in that top section that you see there. As you can see, this is a formative performance task, meaning that this is the task that a teacher would do if they are looking to assess for a given supporting question, which would be scaffolding up to a compelling question for the end of a unit, which would be their summative performance task. This we organize through descriptions, generalizations, explanations, and claims. You will also see that this is scaffolded, so we have our stair-step model here that we have, in which you would move from descriptions to generalizations and so on. You'd be scaffolding these skills throughout. We have kind of brief and concise instructions that the teacher would be selecting which task that the students would be doing. And then the bottom part where you see second, you would see that they would be determining the criteria, and that will be on the other slide that we'll discuss. Where I'd like to spend a little bit more time is looking at these task types. The task types, again, are coming straight from our standards, and the language that we pulled, we've tried to align the language straight from our standards that we have, that you will see in 6th grade through 12th grade. So we begin with description because we believe that this is the fundamental level in which students can begin to be able to describe, and we define that as an account detailing relevant characteristics on a topic. This would be the starting point in which they could work on these tasks, in which they could demonstrate some of those other actions and verbs in that process. They would move up to generalizations, which are summaries and main ideas. As you see, we've tried to underline key components of even the definition to help bring focus for the students and the teachers themselves. We have explanations that we move up to, and then ultimately moving toward claims. In social studies, we are about making arguments and taking an action. But before you're able to make an argument being a series of claims, we would see that you would need to be able to make a claim. And to backwards plan that even more, to make a claim, we see that you would need to be able to make an explanation, and then a summary or a main idea, and then down to a description. So as you see the scaffold progressing up, we also consider this as backwards planning, with the goal being an argument. And this scaffold is what would help build the student skills and communicate conclusion skills within our standards up to that argumentation level that we're really looking for. The next section that you see here is the criteria scaffold level. Now what you see here is the criteria, which is actually on the second half, or if you're looking at the full document of the rubric, it would be the bottom part of the rubric here. And these criteria are accurate, clear, evidenced, and reasoned. And what we're trying to do here is signal to the students which criteria level they could be assessed on. So we try to provide a lot of flexibility within our rubric for the different needs that our students might have and the different levels in which their students have. So they can move easily within one rubric to do a whole variety of different things. So we provide just a few options with our 1, 2, 3 down below that this slide is on what they could do. For a description, we make the claim that we would be able to do accurate and clear on a description. And what the teacher could do is ask the students to circle a 1 or circle a 2. And there's a variety of ways in which we could do this. They could have the entire class do description and really focus on trying to be accurate for that description. They could have the students do accurate and clear for a description, but then circle the one that they're really good at target for assessment that day. So the students could have an opportunity to practice all the assessment criteria skills while just really honing in on an assessment for that formative task on one specific skill while they're still having an opportunity to practice. But what you can also do is vary this up for students and say some students might be ready for a description where they would be doing it at a criteria level 1, which would be, again, accuracy. But other students, maybe 20 other students in the class, are ready to move forward on being accurate and clear. So this demonstration that you see here at the top allows that flexibility for individual students can do things as a whole group, as a whole class, but the teacher can customize that scaffold for the student so they can have the opportunity to really hone in on the skill or the assessment criteria, as we call it, that they would really want to focus on. And because this is, again, on one rubric page, we can also vary up the task for this also. So if some students are still working on mastery for description, Other students might be ready for generalizations. And on one rubric, one page that all the students are using, some students could be working on a generalization for a task, same subject, same content, same lesson, while other students that still need to work on their skills on description could still be on that level. So we're scaffolding the skills based on the individual needs and requirements that the students and our standards are requesting. Brian, do you have any comments and thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, this seems super complex, right? But so is scaffolding learning in the students' minds. And the idea that what we've seen from teachers, one of our favorite exercises is to have them just define explanation, right? We did this just the other day with some schools. And what we found is that per the teacher, there was a different definition of explanation. How in the world then can you provide equitable feedback if everyone has different definitions for explanation, right? So the very first thing this rubric starts to do is define those tasks which everyone needs to coalesce around, right? Whatever it might be, right? But we're saying that these are the four major elements that help students build better arguments over time. The second piece of this is that we all know, right, that a rubric needs to make sure that it provides that equitable understanding, right? Oftentimes our rubrics when coming in just sort of blanket everybody, right? And that's problematic, right? So what we're trying to do is figure out in this next section, how do we individualize that feedback to make not just an authentic assessment, but how do we make sure that those who are engaging in that assessment are going to be able to get meaningful feedback?
And to Ryan's point about language, look at explanation for an example. A lot of that language comes directly from the standards and demands of the standards that we have, our inquiry standards for using evidence, but also communicating conclusions. And what having a common definition would provide for a department is abilities to start to vertically align within your 6th, 7th, and then 8th grade department, or 9th through 12th, obviously. So this provides a common language in which moving from teacher to teacher would provide that consistency, but also common language for the students to use as they start discussing what an explanation is. So as you're moving throughout a class in 6th and 7th and 8th grader, for example, you could start talking about cause, context, or consequence, or talk about how you construct a relationship with topics. These are conversations that students can start to have because the language in these tasks help create the language that you can start having and using within your classroom with your students that would be aligned to our state standards. On our next slide here, this is the bottom portion of the rubric. This is the assessment criteria. Again, this is an annotated version, which we do have provided as a PDF on our website. And to pick up where we left off talking about criteria scaffold levels above. Well, this is those spelled out in more detail. So here we have the scaffold level 1, 2, 3, as you saw above. Those were the scaffold assessment criteria that you were circling and designating for your students on specific tasks. Well, here they are laid out and scaffolded again. So we would be looking at being accurate, then clear, and then layer in evidence and reasoning. All language that you see, especially the language you want to look at evidence as an example, that you would see this specific language quite often in our standard. Then we'd be looking at this as a single point rubric. Many people are used to seeing rubrics on a 4-point scale. We've shifted toward a single point rubric. Quite often the goal is being proficient. We would simply put in the language that we would want to see on being proficient in a given topic. So instead of learning what it means to be a 1 and what it means to be a 2 and a 4 and so on, here we are just focusing on the language of what the teacher demands, which is proficiency, and that provides some simplicity with being able to do that. And the students don't have to necessarily learn multiple languages for what it means to be accurate or clear and so on. What we also have here is detractors and enhancers in our single point rubric setup. Detractors are opportunities to provide feedback. They're identifying what, how, why, whatever category that might be in might be a distraction. So you could talk about what was detracting from being accurate, what was detracting from being evidenced. And then the enhancers are providing feedback of what they really did well You're providing suggested feedback for enrichment, but you're really trying to highlight successes that the student has. You have opportunities for that individual feedback. Again, if you're using a traditional 4-point rubric, the teacher in the past would maybe be circling a 2 or circling a 3, or on some rubrics, maybe even a 2.5 or a 1.5, and there wasn't necessarily space for feedback. That puts the student in an issue of them trying to interpret what you meant when you circle a 2 or 4 or fill. What we find in a lot of writing is that there's times within a given paragraph or within a given essay where they might be really clear in doing it well. And you want to bring attention to that. But there's other times they might not be so clear. And we want to obviously target that. So having a space for targeted feedback for each assessment criteria allows the teacher to provide short but specific feedback to the student to make those incremental changes to improve their writing. The last part I would like to feature here is that these are also hyperlinked on our main documents that we have, again, on our webpage. And why we do that is we try to elaborate and explain what these terms mean. We, again, are trying to provide a common language for each of these situations in which teachers in their PLCs can start to have these conversations. So just like with the language of the task, we have language within our assessment criteria, using evidence as an example. Is it corroborated? Is it weighed? Is it decided? This again is creating language for the teachers to have common conversations. Does 6th grade see weighing evidence in the same way that 7th grade sees it? How can they scaffold that understanding for their students? And again, this creates an opportunity for students to start using our disciplinary language of weighing and citing evidence in a disciplinary way within the class, and that students can start having conversations about what it means to corroborate and how they corroborated their evidence, and weighed their evidence, and so on. Brian, any thoughts on the criteria section?
You know, it's so important to get the language correct, right? And by correct, I mean calibrated among a group. If students walk into one class, they go to another, and the teachers are demanding different things, it's got to be mind-numbing for the kids to try to figure out what each teacher is trying to do, even within the same subject area. Now, I get how there could be differences in different disciplines, but in the social studies, you know, we always want to make sure that our claims or our explanations or generalizations or descriptions are accurate, right? We're living in a world where truth is being attacked. We want to make sure that things are accurate. We want to make sure that the language they're using is clear, right? This academic vocabulary is incredibly important, but it also depends upon the audience in which you're writing. Too often, I think, we have our students writing to us as opposed to their peers, right? Where it's much more accessible and much more fun to write. The last two, evidence and reason, that's what everybody sort of gravitates to, right? But as Vincent has already said, how are we making sure that students are actually adopting the language of the discipline in order to talk about their assessments? It can't be authentic if they're not using the discipline, right? Disciplinary language of that subject matter, right? And when it comes to being able to give pointed feedback, this does it to a T. No more just, as Vincent said before, circling a 2.5, whatever that meant, right? And burdening the student with trying to figure out next steps. You can actually provide very pointed feedback and saying, this is what you can do, right? And especially when it comes to writing or speaking or visual, which this rubric can do all of those things too, we're able to make sure that we're able to give that very personalized feedback for those small incremental improvements to change the skill level, right? The ability level, the knowledge level of kids over time.
So we've actually created several different ways in which you could view this, because we know in the world of NPI, a lot of teachers are using Google Slides quite often more than they did in the past, especially for relaying possible assessments. We've organized this rubric a couple different ways that people can use it within Google Slides, and we're happy to make more to any teacher need. So here we see one version of the rubric where you can lay out the task and they can simply check these boxes and make it clear. This will be handy maybe at the beginning of the lesson to show the students at the beginning what the task is, that they're doing maybe an explanation could be checked, that it would be verbal or written by the end of class, which scaffold level they're doing. But also here we layer in that point that Ryan made, is who's the intended audience for this? Again, this is providing the definition and for the task along with the assessment criteria. Here's another way to look at it, just like you would see, or very similar to what you would see in the Google Doc version, which is detractors and enhancers with the assessment criteria again in the center, where a teacher could use a variety of technology to leave comments in. They could type it in for a student. They could leave voice memos for a student. There's a series of technology and add-ons that they can do if they would like to do it that way. This last one that I'd like to show you is actually requested from a teacher. But they said, I wanted the students to be able to type onto the rubric and see the assessment criteria right next to the response, along with the detractors and enhancers that they wanted to use. So it can all exist on one slide as the student's writing it, but also as the teacher scoring it, they can see the response and leave all the same information on one slide. So we varied this up a couple different ways just to show this rubric is flexible with how you can review it to students. We'd like to briefly talk about our elementary scaffold rubric. It's the same structure as you see before, same annotations in many ways that you see. The only real shift that I want to quickly point out is the language for these tasks actually does shift. Again, what we did for this is we looked at the inquiry standards specifically for 2nd through 5th grade and pulled in as much language as possible to align to the demands and ask of the standard. One example here that you can see is explanation. It goes from a statement that constructs, and the specific language in the standards in elementary talks about it being a cause and effect relationship. And then one of the standards also talks about that it has a requirement to be in a correct sequence. So what we've done is brought in that exact language for that example, just to point out that has the similar structure, except they just shift a little bit with the language to make it more accessible for elementary. Again, the scaffolded assessment part here looks exactly the same, but again, we shifted the language to bring in language from the elementary standards, but the structure is still exactly the same with single point rubric, enhancers, and hyperlink terms. What we would like to do here is provide an opportunity to demonstrate how we can provide meaningful feedback on an assessment in this example. So again, I've taken one of our slides here and put in the task at the top. I've checked this for the students where they can see that it's a generalization, that it's written, that we're going to be assessing whether it's clear and accurate, and that the audience is for students within their class that would be reading this in this example, along with the definitions again that are provided right here. And what I'd like you to do is read along with me, but I will read it out loud for you. So this is straight out of a 5th grade example that we have. This is a supporting question at 5th grade level again. It says, why do we celebrate the 4th of July on Juneteenth? This is from our curriculum framework, this supporting question. The formative performance task is asking them to summarize why we celebrate the 4th of July on Juneteenth. And here we've provided a student response, which I will read for you, but take a minute to read and process. Also, we celebrate both things because they are special to people. Juneteenth is almost a celebration of the end of slavery, but it is sad that it was delayed from when they were actually free. The 4th of July freed us from England, not enslaved people though. And so this is an example of a student response that we would see for a formative task, which again, the formative task is demonstrating their knowledge for that supporting question. Brian, would you like to talk about some of the ways in which we could demonstrate feedback that a teacher can give on the rubric?
Yes, I love being the mean teacher who's going to make sure that my kids can write more effectively. So imagine then you've got this student response, and it says some stuff, right? But it may not say it in a way that we want to be able to sort of move forward, right? So looking at the first criteria, is the information provided? Information provides a reasonable interpretation of sources. Okay, so specific details of the holidays, right? Are they saying anything about this, right? They don't really talk about specific elements of the holidays. Maybe they could do that, right? It might provide some distinction between the two to tell us more about what those holidays really are about. Some of the terms, I just noticed, Vincent, we missed one here. We celebrate both things. Is a holiday a thing? Maybe we could just say we celebrate both holidays, right? That might be a very easy shift for students to see because students sometimes like to use this very vague language. The term almost, right? We see this in the second sentence there, right? Juneteenth is almost a celebration of the end of slavery. But no, Juneteenth is the celebration, right? That is the way of celebration. And then we could point that student back to two sources that they used to reaffirm what they're looking at, right? So it's not because, Mr. New just is trying to be a mean guy. It's, let's take a look at what the evidence is saying, because that's exactly what that criteria says. Information provides a reasonable interpretation of sources. I'm going to point them back to the sources, right? Actually freed, right? Now we're talking about the way that they're using some of their language, right? When is a person free, right? Was a person free all along, but they were enslaved by others, right? What is the point of view of this student as they're writing this, right? These are things that we can start to bring out. Now, listen, I'm not saying this is the first time that I'm going to be giving the feedback to a kid on this level in this, but it's going to take some time to develop a relationship, right, to where you can give more and more pointed feedback, and the students start to recognize, Mr. New's not just being a mean guy, he's actually trying to help. If we're able to see, I don't know what happened to our screen there, Vincent, you might need to say something to pull it back to your screen.
Am I not presenting anymore?
No.
Yep, there you go. It kept going back and forth a little bit on my screen. Over on enhancers, right? This is good. They're using some good language. Maybe they've heard the teacher or some of the sources use the word enslaved people versus slaves, for example. This is an important understanding of what was done to people. And then when we see the sorry, Elaine, I think that it keeps cutting back to you.
No.
That there's accuracy in.
It's doing fine. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
That there's accuracy in the the correlation of the two holidays, right? When it comes to the clarity of the language, right? This is where we can start to fit much more into the language itself, right? So the use of the word sad, for example. Maybe we should use more descriptive words that capture the perseverance and the resistance, right? So maybe we could use the word not just, right? But it is not just that it was delayed from when they were actually freed, right? Versus just, allowing a student to sort of say that. I think that's a very important distinction about making sure that what they're saying is accurate to what they want to say, right? A great suggestion here. Let's combine the last two sentences. There's no reason why, right? Those two sentences need to be separate. This might be a good combination to provide greater clarity for an idea, right? Than having it segmented in two different ways. And also, who is the us? Who is the they? One of my favorite teachers the other day was giving some feedback, and he just kept talking about the pronoun use, right? You guys keep using all these pronouns, but you have to be more specific with who we're talking about. Are you talking about the colonists, right? And especially something that students tend to do, specifically in the social studies, is they talk about the us, right? When we were there, but not everybody was represented that same way. Not everybody identifies with that certain history. And that could be problematic language for students to be able to use that and become conditioned and habituate towards using that language in claim making, right? Or in this case, a summary. But we also want to applaud the students, right, for being able to say, look, you're using great academic language, right? Being able to use Juneteenth, being able to use England, right? Being able to use the 4th of July. Those are very specific factual information elements that were part of those sources, right? And that an audience would definitely need. Right. So these are just one example, right, of a teacher providing some solid feedback, right, to a student, so that they can then shift their understanding, right, over time. Right. You'll notice here that there's nothing in the red that would have ever been on a 4-point rubric where you're circling numbers. Right. And that oftentimes a rubric like this is designed to improve students' ability with their skill. The other types of rubrics, right, where you're just circling numbers, is there to get a score, right? And we want to make sure that we're making that distinction, because any kind of authentic assessment will be destroyed, right? It'll be undermined without a quality rubric to provide feedback to move those folks forward and to be able to continuously scaffold their learning in future assessments.
And Ryan, I just think that's a great point of understanding the student identity of who they are and where they're at, that this isn't feedback you would necessarily give on the first assessment, that even what you're doing here to demonstrate what we've discussed in the presentation is that it might seem like low-hanging fruit to point that they're using the 4th of July and Juneteenth as terms, but when you see it in the enhancer, you're encouraging that behavior, encouraging that language in our discipline, but then they'll see that instantly in the distractor that they're using the term us. And so they kind of contrast each other, and you're nudging that student to make incremental changes within their writing.
Yeah, and I think that, listen, writing is the hardest thing academically our kids are probably going to do, right? And that it's super important for us to make that a central element, because one of the reasons why writing is so difficult is that students really take to heart that this is their identity being expressed. That's why it's difficult for them to share out their writing, both by turning it in or by verbalizing in some way. But ultimately, what they say is who they are, right? And we have to be able to make the students, give them enough skills and ability and experiences to improve the version of themselves that they want to see, right? And giving that feedback is very difficult, right? But these are the types of feedback that we think would be effective of moving students towards, being greater citizens, as well as great people.
I believe we're getting close to the end of time, but I just want to feature that we have some key objectives that we noticed here, that we're trying to provide formative performance tasks that provide consistent feedback for students to improve literacy and mastery of standards, that we've done our best to align our rubric along with the inquiry standards that are provided. That this is rooted again in our inquiry and disciplinary standards, but we're also scaffolding to construct arguments. That ultimately our goal is for our students to be making arguments, and our formative tasks are scaffolding those skills to build to that argumentation piece. And then again, that our tasks are creating criteria for expectations for this, and it's bringing coherence around a specific language so teachers can start vertically aligning themselves around common language, so they can also start calibrating with each other, even across grade levels, because the rubric and language would be common and consistent with that PLC work.
Excellent. Well, listen, please reach out to us, Ryan.New, Rebecca.Ingram, Vincent.Tinker. We'll be joining you guys later on this afternoon with one of our teachers who've been using this rubric, Daria Ochanowski from Newburgh. And so we'll look forward to seeing you guys then.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. And yes, just as Ryan said, just make sure you come in after lunch and come back and see some of the awesome presenters as well. So we have one more person before lunch who is going to be presenting. And we have, for world language, Eli Beardsley, who is going to present for us. And as you join us right now, just make sure that you introduce yourself in that chat. And okay, let me see, make sure I can jump over here and get this. Let's see, little technical difficulty. No worries. But while you're in here, just go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know who you are. And also, if you have any questions for our presenters. Let me go in here and make sure that we have this. Just 2 seconds. All right, so here is Eli going to share with us. Here we go.
Good morning. My name is Eli Beardsley. I'm the World Language Instructional Lead. Great to be here this morning, and I'm going to record the session here. So I'm going to go ahead and present now.
And I believe Eli is in the chat with us, so go ahead and let him know if you have any questions, and we will be happy to answer them.
So, again, excited to be here with you all this morning. Very much looking forward to sharing some information with you, and hopefully there's some things you may know, and hopefully there's some new learning as well that you can take and apply to your classroom. Again, our session, themed sessions today for December 16th are ownership and authentic assessment. And so I want shifted and pivoted from in face-to-face conferences to in November, they hosted their first large-scale virtual conference. And again, the silver lining with some of these conferences going virtual is that if there were more than one session during that same time slot, you can only be in so many places at once. But with these virtual options, it's been great because they have provided access to basically all sessions. And so I kind of found 3. So these are fresh out of November 2020 that I want to share with you guys today. So we'll take about an even 7-8 minutes on each one, and hopefully there'll be a little time for questions at the end as well. The first one is, again, the power of effective feedback. There's a lady, her name is Rand Dalton. She did some action research, provided some background, and tying in the literature review about what effective feedback looks like, and then shared some of the results of her study. There's a great world language teacher from Wellesley, Massachusetts. His name is Tim Egan. He, again, provided a lot of background information and some of the literature on single point rubrics. And so I want to share some of those tools with you in case you are not familiar with those and how they may relate to some of our JCPS world language rubrics that we already have. And then the last 2 are a teaching team of a French teacher and a Spanish teacher that combined together to show how some peers may be able to do some peer evaluation or peer feedback as well. So I hope that you'll enjoy some of this information, and we'll kind of jump right in. So, in today's world, we're all very familiar with John Hattie and his work, Visible Learning and other great things. But I thought I'd start with this quote because it is very striking, and I think it does kind of help set our stage for today and the rest of the time together. The most powerful single modification that enhances achievement is feedback. And that's kind of why I wanted to tie this in today, and I found those 3 sessions that I thought were hopefully going to be very helpful. I do know that, again, keeping in mind, and the reality is that whether you have 24 students or 154 students, finding the time and finding systems that allow teachers to provide that targeted and specific effective feedback can be very challenging, especially as the number of students that you serve increases. So I'm hoping that we'll find a couple ways that kind of help that today. So the first session, again, I want to share with you is, I like the title here, Getting Beyond the Grades and Good Job, the Power of Effective Feedback. So this, again, her name is Rand Dalton. She's connected there with San Diego State University, and we'll kind of look at what she has to say and what she's brought together for feedback, and then I'll tell you a little bit about her action research, crossing elementary, high school, and then the university level. So as many of us know and are familiar with, the different types of feedback. So when we are looking at those types of feedback, again, the big deal, this is not anything new, but formative versus assessment, or not versus, but in comparison to. Her point in kind of the beginning of her session was that we, the big we, tend to pay way too much attention to the summative. And as you know, again, it's generally formalized, it's standardized, it's evaluative, and it also, like we all know, occurs at the ending of the learning process. So while it is important and it does play a role, she is really suggesting that we need to put much more of our emphasis on the formative side, where things are diagnostic, they're timely, they're part of the learning process. She kind of makes the case that, and this is not anything we don't know, but that if we're waiting for feedback all the way to the summative piece, it's at the end of learning. And so we've kind of missed that just in time, or we've missed that timeliness to be able to help redirect students or help reteach students or help them be able to relearn. I also like that she kind of shared an analogy in her presentation about students being sort of like flowers or trees. She said, the summative piece is that, we water them, and then at the end, we measure their height and how much they have grown. And that is important data to analyze, but what is more important is the formative piece of how much sunlight did they get, what kind of soil are they in, what factors have been part of that formative process that has helped grow according to their individual needs. So. And again, she cites as well with Hattie's work there with the visible learning that, again, if you look at the top, feedback is the fifth one down as far as effect size. And so, this is again across 1,000 research reviews, over 50,000 studies, and involving over 200 million students. So we know that it is a very powerful piece of the equation. So Rand Dalton suggested here again that there are some components to effective feedback. And so I like some of these terms. They were sort of new to me. I hadn't heard some of this before, and I like it. So what progress the students have made so far is we call that feedback. We're looking back. Where are they going is she used that as feed forward. And then what specific activities can they do next to progress or continue that progression is again part of that feed forward. So what does it look like? Okay, and you're going to hear this come back up a little bit too towards the third piece of all of this is that, it needs to be targeted, it needs to be specific and goal referenced. And so I know that's something with world language that we're working on with student goals. So if we can tie it back to what students are already looking at making or achieving as their goal, it needs to be neutral. I know that's something as I reflect back on some of my teaching. I was a Spanish teacher, a world language teacher, covering a couple languages, middle school ELA, high school ESL. And so I feel like sometimes some of my feedback maybe was not neutral. Timely, again, that's, where we're all aware is that as the number of students increases, it can be a challenge to get that timeliness back in. Again, measurable, and then again, the most important thing there is actionable. What can students do with it once they know and hear some of that feedback? So I want to share a little bit from Rand Dalton's action research. So here's how she set things up. She had 3 different levels. She had elementary Mandarin, Chinese, and it was an immersion program, about 24 students. She also had an AP high school Mandarin Chinese class, which had, I think, between 25 and 30 students. And then she also compared against a college level Mandarin Chinese class with a similar grouping of students, 25 to 30. She set up an experimental group and a control group. And the theme was, as she described in her presentation, was theme-related vocabulary. So they were looking at identifying vocabulary, using the vocabulary in sentences, and then there was a sum assessment at the end. And how she set the experimental versus the control was that she provided the experimental group with narrative feedback throughout that whole process. And what she found was that in all of those cases and across all of those levels, the experimental group outperformed the control group. And so I just kind of snipped a picture from her presentation about the elementary level here with, again, Mandarin Chinese and immersion. And what I liked about it was she kind of used this 4-square approach of providing feedback, giving there were components of what the students did, again, in narrative form that was good, some things to not forget, some things that the students could improve further upon, and then the intentional connection to the learning. She calls it a learning intention or success criteria or learning outcomes. There are a lot of different ways we can say that same idea. But this was, again, over the course of a period of time. So that'll kind of transition over from Rand Dalton's work to, again, this is Tim Egan from Wellesley Public Schools in Massachusetts. He described himself as a department chair there at the high school, and then kind of jumped in with this single point rubric and giving again background and then some really solid examples, and shared a lot of the resources. So the three things we'll look at with single point rubrics are: why are they important? Okay, kind of what are they and why are they important? What are they in the design and content, and how does this kind of connect to some of the JCPS resources we already have available, which again are some of the JCPS rubrics. We'll talk about that here a little bit. And then how do they continue to contribute to guiding student growth? So he gave an interesting background on these single point rubrics, and some of what he shared was that the term has really not been, it's a fairly new term. And it kind of came out, it was cited in this Cult of Pedagogy article with single point rubrics based on a university level study that was done. And then also this Cult of Pedagogy article is a really nice summary, again, from 2015, Jennifer Gonzalez. Encourage you to click on this and read it. It does give you some good background if this is a new term that you are interested in. But here's the effectiveness, the study from 2010, where I kind of snipped that little quote. So this was from Jareen Flukinger, and she is kind of credited for pulling some of this information together and terming it as a single point rubric. So again, a quote from there is: descriptive feedback is more helpful than a number, a grade, a score, a ranking, or even a single descriptive label. And I think once you kind of, if you're not familiar with single point rubrics, once you kind of get in and see some of the things that they can do, it'll be, I hope, worth a try in your classes. These are some templates from the Cult of Pedagogy article there. They're linked in as well. And again, the main idea is a single point rubric is kind of what it sounds like as a term. They pull one set of success criteria out, and there are different ways to do it, and you'll see some different examples. These have concerns or advanced. We'll see grow and glow, strengths, areas for improvement, however you would want to term that. And then what that allows students to be able to do, and the teacher, of course, is to be able to really focus and zoom in on a very specific and kind of nuanced set of success criteria. So those templates are, again, linked in. This is just another way of looking at it with, again, the criteria going down the side and then the leveling here with some areas for commentary. They decided with beginner, developing, accomplished, or exemplary. So I just kind of want to make that available from the article. So again, why? So one of Tim Egan's points is that teachers have found this to be a lot easier and faster to create. Students, which is a good thing, so they're our target audience. They find them much. The results from the study, and then have found that students find them easier to read, and they can provide higher quality feedback. Tim also brought in another resource for us to explore, and it's from 2017. It's from an Edutopia article called 6 Reasons to Try a Single Point Rubric. And it gets linked here for you to kind of to jump in and explore. It's a short article, maybe 2 pages or so. And so what you will find here as you are able to kind of look through it, again, is that it identifies and reflects on both strengths and weaknesses. So it can help teachers share meaningfully with students and what they did really well, what they may want to consider to make some adjustments. I like this point number 2. They tend to not place boundaries on student performance. And so it allows students to kind of have some of that creativity with it and bring in their own ideas. Students, again, work against the tendency to rank themselves and compare themselves to one each other, compete against each other. it takes, and I like this one too with number 4, again, if you think back to that quote a minute ago, that it takes some of the attention off of the grade. This feedback, again, as we know, and we're hearing more and more, is the more individualized the feedback, it's a better thing than even just the grade itself. Can help with some flexibility there without sacrificing clarity. They have clear expectations for what they will do. And then it's simple. Sometimes I don't know about you all, but sometimes even when those rubrics are stretched all the way across the paper, you're moving things into a horizontal or a landscape. And we've got all those success criteria in there, and it can feel a little overwhelming. So this really kind of helps simplify that task as well. So here's an example straight from Tim's presentation. And so again, this is Wellesley Public Schools. And what they have done is they've taken the GLOW and GROW approach. GROW, again, ways your work is showing simpler understanding or skills or areas of growth. And then the GLOW, what did you do well, and ways in your performance showed advanced learning. And so they've just pulled one success criteria out from an intermediate low, and then kind of against this performance rubric here with comprehensibility, vocabulary, text type, again, task functions, all those things. And then always you can add in some further can-do statements too, if you'd like. And so he just kind of pulled this out and said, again, from our performance rubrics, with the range, again, from novice mid to, for example, advanced low, let's focus on one single point, single area. So I feel like, that's something that, can really be pinpointed there depending on what students are learning. So and again, please know, if you are not familiar with the World Languages Shared Drive, there is a rubric folder within it. Now, again, look at the dates. It's 12/17 of 2014. I think we could all agree that there probably needs to be some updates, and we will absolutely plan on doing that this summer. That'll be a big project. I know our World Languages work group is kind of tackling right now, is looking at program structure. We're going to look at curriculum. We're going to look at instruction. We're going to look at professional development. We're going to look at family engagement. And so one of the things I'd like to do is to pull some teachers together this summer to help look at these rubrics and update them as we need to. So please know, there's hopefully going to be some updates coming. But again, this interpersonal performance assessment rubric, what we could do, because we do have them sitting for right now, again, these are all based off the ACTFL can-do statements, we could just pull one of the levels out for a single point rubric. Okay, we've got what language do I use? How do I use that language? Okay, so as you look through those, and if you need access to them, please let me know if you're a new teacher and new to the district, or are new since 2014 and maybe didn't know that was available. Please just email me. It's elisha.beardsley, or get a hold of me and I'll make sure that we can get you in there. Again, this will sound reminiscent from Rand Dalton's information at the beginning, but Tim pulls some more feedback literature from Marzano, again, another big name in education. But I think the thing that I like about how he presented this a little bit differently was, again, we've seen some of the same things with specific and descriptive, goal-related, actionable, user-friendly, which is kind of an addition. But what I kind of jumped off the page to me was that term, just the right amount. And so that also got me to reflect a little bit as well as a teacher. Was I giving them just the right amount? And so he pulled a source, Susan Brookhart, How to Give Effective Feedback to Your Students. And what her claim is, she is saying that, just enough for students. How much is the right amount? We want to give them just enough so they know what to do with it, so they can understand, but not so much that the work's been done for them. And I think when I reflect back, I think that's where I kind of make myself, I'm a little nervous to think back of what I did, because I feel like I probably was in that first bullet point. I kind of probably overwhelmed most of the students, and then I probably led them more closely to an answer, a solution, than letting them have some productive struggle to get there with support. So that kind of hit a salient point with me. So we don't want to overwhelm them. And then she suggests, again, Brookhart suggests, just keep it to 2 to 3 main points. I also want to share with you all, in case you are interested in taking on these single point rubrics and trying them for yourself, that Tim included in his presentation some sentence stems for grow and glow. So I thought that was kind of nice to see that there may be some options there, and it's kind of sitting there, and use them if you'd like. This is quality work because, again, we will try to be neutral. Your work shows, your descriptions include, your use of adverbs, and again, all of this with world language could be in the target language. So just keep that in mind. And when we look at the next the last part of it as well, as we'll jump into some of that peer evaluation, that peer feedback work that can be in target language as well. And again, he's got some sentence stems there for grow feedback as well. You might want to try to include more. One way to improve is look at vocabulary options from your next step might be, okay, just to highlight a few. And then I thought this was kind of an interesting thing too. And again, we're all aware that, especially at the high school level, you may have well over 100 students in the 140, 150, 160, whatever group. And that's a lot. And that, this could be, although we know it's what's best, we have to also be mindful that it can be hard to do. So Tim suggested, he said, hey, look, my colleague, Mike Travers, came up with this feedback form, and he used it called a comment bank. And so he had this ready to go with pretty much every assignment or task they involved. And so he had already these kind of already pre-made out. And so he could go through, instead of handwriting them or typing them, he could go through and circle or select or highlight these for that single point rubric. And so if you feel like that's something that could benefit you and, again, help speed up the process a little bit and save time, please consider using this example or using the idea of it and creating your own. So that's going to kind of wrap up the portion of the presentation with Tim Egan's single point rubrics. The last phase we're going to look at and moving into is 2 presenters, Kelly Blake Karstrand and Anna Hernandez. Kelly is a French teacher and Anna is a Spanish teacher. And they got together they call this flipping feedback, engaging students in the feedback process. And I kind of picked this one because I thought, there were some connections with being an NTI. There were some suggestions on how to help, do this in breakout rooms and in a virtual setting, and to really involve students in giving part of that feedback. So their whole point, and they said this numerous times, and they repeated it 3 times, is scaffold, 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 teach, model, model, model. So as we all know, what we don't want to have happen is setting students up into a breakout room, and then it's crickets, and there's no discussion, no talking, or it's back to kind of what Rand Dalton said at the beginning was, good job. And so she said, the more you can front load this, the more you can scaffold this, the more you can teach this, the more time we invest at the beginning, the dividends will pay off later. So the way they've got this scaffolded is they've got it scaffolded through a 4-step process. And so step 1, they've got, and what's nice is they've got all of these resources at the end. I've linked them in here too. They put them in a Google Drive. They're all in PDF form. And so they can be shared as well. But step 1, asks that students look at the task requirement checklist. So they're looking at and not evaluating, but they're giving each other feedback on just the task requirements. Step 2 is again a commentary checklist. And so it's kind of moving from a yes-no situation, is it there or is it not, into a little bit more specific feedback. Moves into an open-ended commentary, which we'll look at again. And then the last one is the AP-inspired rubric. They both taught, each taught AP French and then AP Spanish. So let's look at a couple examples really quick. And again, this isn't a drive that is open and can be shared. So in their presentation, full presentation is in there as well. So if you'd like to look at that. And how they kind of situated this was that they used the student example of sending, and the task was sending an email in the target language to inquire in another country about hotel reservations, food recommendations, what to see and do in, you pick the city or country. And so back to this kind of task opening task requirement checklist, students can give each other feedback, again, looking at the email. Are these things included or are they not? It's a yes or no, simple yes or no. And so it kind of goes through those steps. As you think about moving into step 2 and step 3, what I like and what they suggested was again, the scaffolding process. So this is not a one-time email that they submit. It would be kind of considered a draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, and potentially draft 4 if they went all the way to the AP-inspired rubric. And so that with each draft, students are getting that feedback from each other, and then they're seeing what they can do to improve, and then they're redrafting it, and then they redraft it, and then towards the end, then they've have worked with the same material 3 and 4 different times with all those feedback loops in to hopefully really help improve and grow. So the simple question on, again, just to reiterate, is step 1 is this task requirement checklist. Do students understand the tasks? Do they understand what it is they need to do? What is supposed to be in it? Okay. Step 2 is, again, this commentary checklist. And again, this would be more like this part of it here. Positive aspects of the response, suggestions for improvement, and they're kind of lined up, as you can see. All 3 sources cited, 3 sources not cited. And the big idea here is that students also in this section, step 2, they are now required to react and give some feedback. So there is down at the bottom a personal reflection. So that's kind of nice to see, okay, now what has my partner said? What do I need to think about that, and how do I make is it kind of on track or not? Why or why not? And again, think about these are obviously in English for the presentation, but these also all could be in the world language. Step 3, this is where it gets into open-ended commentary. And the system they've set up, again, we've seen glow, grow, we've seen strengths, areas of improvement. They used a system called 2 stars and 1 wish. Okay, so 2 stars highlight, again, this kind of goes back to that feedback. Let's find 2 to 3 things that we see in the research there. Focus on just 2 to 3 things. And again, 1 wish or 1 thing that students could improve upon. So again, here it is a little bit up close. They've got some sentence starters in there, some sentence frames. Again, students would be encouraged to do 2 or 2 stars again and 1 wish. And then at the end of this, so this would be probably like the 3rd time they've done something on the same task, then students will move into a personal reflection. So the student himself or herself is going to say, for my next whatever, what did I do well? And then what can I improve upon? Then the part I really like is that the student is going to actually set up an action plan. And they're getting some sentence starters here, or an opportunity for students to think a little bit differently. But there's some things that are very specific that students kind of making it a goal to improve upon for next time. And then the last piece there is, again, the AP-inspired rubric. If you are teaching an AP course, an IB course at this point, you may be able to kind of use this as that last final piece. And again, what they did is they adapted the AP rubric. And again, thinking about the difference when we just talked about a single point with a much more in-depth AP rubric here. So keep that in mind. That's something that can be done as well. And at the end there, again, it says it's kind of a reflective point on your action plan. Were you successful? If you were not, why weren't you? So just to kind of wrap up, because I want to make sure we leave about a minute or two for questions in the comments section or following up with me. We looked at the power of feedback from Rand Dalton. And again, we know that feedback loop is so important. Her action research, as we all kind of know, is that we can give that effective, specific feedback. Students are able to grow. Tim Egan gave us some really good examples of single point rubrics. And again, if you haven't tried, maybe something you want to, I'm always happy to help be a thought partner there too. If you want to get a hold of me, I'd set up some time to work through that process with you together, and I'd love to be part of your classes too. If just set up the time, I'll make sure I'm there. And then that last piece, again, I think with Kelly and Anna, that peer feedback is very important. It can, they could not underemphasize or overemphasize, however you want to say it, that you've got to scaffold, invest that time early. But then students, instead of you being one teacher to 150 students, especially at the high school level, again, if that class of 30, if each of them can have a partner or a small group for feedback, can really speed up that feedback process. So I do appreciate everything, and thank you for the opportunity to present and share information with you. Please get a hold of me, and look forward to working with you. Stop presenting and give everybody a wave. Okay. Thanks again.
I love it. Thank you so much, Eli. And you are appreciated, and we really do want to share that. So when you grab the link, or please grab the link that's below and share that with someone that you know will enjoy this session. These sessions will also be broken up into individual sessions, so it's not just a one morning session, and look for those on demand in the corresponding playlists. So we will be back at 12:30, so make sure that you join in. And also, like I said, if you don't mind to share with someone what you have learned today, and if you could just put it on Twitter with the hashtag JCPSDigIn for digital innovation, and we will all be able to learn from one another there. Until after lunch, have a good break.